Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today we're not just talking about a villain, we're talking about a boy whose name would one day become a synonym for terror. Voldemort, one of the most dangerous dark wizards in the history of the magical world, but he wasn't always like this. Once, he was simply Tom Riddle, an ordinary, though peculiar, boy. And now I want to share facts about his life before becoming Lord Voldemort. Facts you may not have known or may have forgotten. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Young Tom was known for his beauty. If you picture Voldemort, snake-like face, pale skin, slits for nostrils, it's hard to imagine he was ever considered attractive, but young Tom Riddle was just that. Tall, slender, with dark hair and piercing eyes, his manners, speech and charm seemed flawless. This outer perfection helped him win over almost everyone. He skillfully hid his true nature, earned trust, and then used it. It was with this charm that he began recruiting his future Death Eaters. Number 2, he was a half-blood. The greatest irony of Voldemort's story, despite his obsession with pure blood, he was a half-blood. His mother, Gaunt, was a witch and a descendant of Salazar Slytherin, but his father, Tom Riddle Sr., was an ordinary muggle. When Tom discovered the truth about his heritage, he was furious. He rejected his surname, his past, his human side. He became Voldemort, the one who would cleanse the magical world of people like himself. Number 3, his mother and the love potion. His birth story is just as tragic. Gaunt was a rejected, broken woman. She fell in love with a handsome but proud muggle, Tom Riddle. She had no hope of mutual affection, so she turned to a love potion. The potion worked. Tom Sr. lived with her, and she became pregnant. But one day, Merope convinced herself the love was real, and stopped using the potion. That's when the magic faded. He left her, just walked away. Alone, pregnant and abandoned, Merope died shortly after giving birth. Thus, Tom Riddle was born, an unwanted child, conceived without love. Number 4, the family practiced inbreeding. Merope came from the Gaunts, direct descendants of Salazar Slytherin. For generations they tried to preserve blood purity by marrying within their own family. Inbreeding was the norm. It led to the physical and mental decline of the family, but it also left deep marks on Voldemort's psyche. His obsession with control, perfection, and purity may well be the result of warped upbringing and the crushing weight of twisted ideals. Number 5. Prefect. At Hogwarts, Tom Riddle was a model student, brilliant in class, never caught breaking rules officially, and seemingly flawless in every way. Unsurprisingly, he was made a prefect, a position of trust reserved for the most responsible and respected students. But for Tom, it was just a tool. He used his prefect status to secretly explore Hogwarts, find hidden chambers, and seek forbidden knowledge. He manipulated others, constantly sharpening his skills of deception and control. Number 6. Albus Dumbledore. Almost every teacher was charmed by Tom. Almost, but not all. Albus Dumbledore saw through him from the very beginning, when he first came to fetch him from the orphanage. A boy who stole from others, scared them, and enjoyed having power. Dumbledore did not miss these warning signs. He always watched Tom, never trusted him, and Tom felt it. That unease grew into cold, silent contempt. Dumbledore eventually became Voldemort's only real fear, because Dumbledore saw what others didn't, the truth behind the mask. Number 8. The secret behind his name. Tom Marvolo Riddle was born in a London orphanage. His mother, Merope Gaunt, named him as she lay dying, giving him both the name of his father, Tom Riddle, and her own father, Marvolo Gaunt. It was an act of desperation, a wish that her son would carry some connection to the family he would never know. But Tom saw his name as a curse, not a legacy. As he grew, the boy despised everything his name stood for. Abandonment, weakness, and a bloodline he didn't choose. Later, in the very heart of Hogwarts, Tom revealed his true identity to Harry Potter by writing in the air, "I am Lord Voldemort." The letters twisted and shifted, rearranging his birth name into a new one without family, without love, without past. "You think I was going to use my filthy muggle father's name forever?" he sneered. By remaking himself as Lord Voldemort, Tom erased all ties to the pain and shame of his origin. He was no longer the unwanted orphan, no longer the son of Merrope. He chose power over heritage, and in doing so turned his own name into a symbol of fear. Number 9. Hidden cruelties in childhood. Tom Riddle never screamed. He didn't throw tantrums. His silence was worse. Other children in the orphanage felt it first. Something cold behind his calm voice. Something dangerous in the way he looked at them. Miss Cole, the matron, said, "He was a funny boy, always watching. Things happened when he was around." Illness, injuries, fear. One boy was found with his mouth glued shut. Another swore he saw his rabbit hanging, lifeless, from the rafters. But no one could ever prove anything. When Dumbledore visited the orphanage, Tom was only 11. Still, he spoke with chilling calm. "I can make them hurt if I want to," he said. No regret, no hesitation. He described how he made 2 children follow him into a cave on a holiday trip. He did something to them. They never spoke about it again. He enjoyed it. Dumbledore's wand burst into flame, lighting the cupboard behind Tom. The boy didn't flinch. He simply said, "I knew I was different." It wasn't magic that made Tom dangerous. It was what he chose to do with it. He didn't experiment with power. He used it to dominate, to punish, to control. And he didn't need spells to do it. His cruelty was precise, methodical, and cold. From the beginning, he was already becoming what the wizarding world would later fear most, not just a dark wizard, but a child who found pleasure in pain. Number 10. The shoebox of stolen treasures. In the orphanage, Tom Riddle didn't play like the other children. He watched, he waited, and then he took. Not out of need, but control. Small things vanished, a silver thimble, a soldier figurine, a colourful marble. He kept them in a battered shoebox hidden under his bed. To everyone else, they were trash. But to Tom, they were proof. Proof he could take what he wanted. Proof no one could stop him. Miss Cole once said he liked to keep things he'd taken from other children. This habit never left him. At Hogwarts it evolved. The toys became artifacts, the box became a vault. And the sentiment behind them? Power. His first Horcrux wasn't just any object, it was the diary, not a book filled with memories, but a weapon disguised as a keepsake. Later came the ring of Marvolo Gaunt, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, each one a trophy, each one stolen or claimed in blood. These were no longer trinkets, they were symbols of conquest, of dominion, of eternal life. Dumbledore saw the pattern. Lord Voldemort liked to collect trophies, he told Harry, but it began long before Voldemort. It began with a child, sitting alone in a cold room, hiding other people's treasures in a shoebox. Not for comfort, but for control. Number 11. Early obsession with immortality. Tom Riddle feared only one thing, death. Even as a teenager, the idea of dying disgusted him. He saw it as a weakness, a flaw of the human condition that he would rise above. While other students worried about exams, Tom read about ancient, dark rituals, lost magic, and forbidden spells. He searched the restricted section not for curiosity's sake, but for a plan. In his mind, immortality wasn't a dream, it was a right. He had power, he deserved to live forever. That's when he found the word, Horcrux, a dark object made by committing murder and tearing the soul. Even the mention of it made adult wizards recoil. But Tom didn't flinch. "It's the most evil of magical inventions," Dumbledore later said. To Riddle, it was elegant, logical. Why die when you could live forever by sacrificing others? The death of his mother haunted him, not with grief, but with contempt. She had died in weakness, he would not. And so, the boy who once collected trinkets in a shoebox now collected fragments of his soul. Myrtle Warren's death was only the beginning. The diary was his first Horcrux, the first crack in a soul that would soon be shattered. "You're not afraid to die?" he asked Harry, shocked years later. Tom never understood, because for him immortality was not a question. It was a goal, and he would kill to reach it. Again and again. Number 12, Slughorn's favourite. Professor Horace Slughorn prided himself on recognizing greatness. He handpicked students with potential and groomed them for influence. Tom Riddle was his favourite. Polite, brilliant, impeccably dressed. He had the charm Slughorn adored. The professor invited him to his exclusive Slug Club dinners, seating him beside ministry heirs and Quidditch stars. He saw in Tom a future minister of magic, maybe even more. Very handsome, very gifted, Slughorn would later recall. "I used to say he was the most promising student Hogwarts ever had." One evening, flattered by Riddle's soft voice and respectful tone, Slughorn let down his guard. Tom asked about Horcruxes, not out of curiosity, but precision. He already knew what they were. He just wanted confirmation. Slughorn hesitated. "Well, you must understand this is very dark magic, very dark indeed." But Riddle pressed, asking, "What would happen if someone made more than one?" His tone was calm, almost clinical. Slughorn, uncomfortable, gave a half answer. "7? 7 would be the most stable number." That moment changed everything. Years later, when Dumbledore retrieved the memory, Slughorn was haunted. He had altered it to hide his shame. "Don't think badly of me when you see it," he pleaded, because deep down he knew. He had given Voldemort the key. He hadn't created the monster, but he had helped sharpen its teeth. A single careless conversation had opened the door to horrors the wizarding world could barely imagine. Riddle, of course, never thanked him. He vanished from Slughorn's life without a word, but he left with a plan. He would not make 1 Horcrux, or 2, he would make 7, and so, with the help of a kind-hearted professor and a glass of crystallized pineapple, the darkest legacy in wizarding history began with a smile. Number 13, Passion for Secrets and Forbidden Knowledge. Tom Riddle was never satisfied with ordinary knowledge. While other students studied for exams or played wizard chess, he disappeared into the restricted section of the library. He read what others feared to touch, books bound in dragon hide, pages that whispered when turned. In his 3rd year, he charmed a student to steal a copy of Secrets of the Darkest Art, a book banned even among adult wizards. He didn't flinch. Instead, he devoured it. Inside, he found a word that would define his life: Horcrux. By 5th year, Tom understood magic beyond most professors. He could perform non-verbal spells with ease. He brewed complex potions faster than any classmate. But most dangerous of all, he began testing limits. "There is nothing wrong with curiosity," Professor Slughorn once told him, "but some knowledge is best left alone." Tom had smiled. "I only want to understand, sir, to be the best I can be." But behind those words was a hunger for something darker. He didn't want to understand. He wanted to dominate. Riddle was always collecting, not just spells, but people, secrets, weaknesses. He knew who was afraid of whom, who had family troubles, who had something to hide. He stored it all like a general studying the battlefield. This knowledge gave him power. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore reflects, he valued people who gave him information and discarded those who didn't. For Tom, everything was a transaction, every secret a weapon. He believed information was power. Forbidden books became his allies. Ancient rituals became his tools. He wasn't just a student, he was a builder, constructing something terrible, one secret at a time. Every late night in the library, every whispered spell, every lie told with a perfect smile brought him closer to what he would become. Voldemort was not born, he was built. By book, lie by lie. Number 14, Riddle and the Chamber of Secrets. The Chamber of Secrets had been a legend whispered through the halls of Hogwarts for centuries. But in Tom Riddle's 5th year, it became terrifyingly real. He was not just a brilliant student, he was the last descendant of Salazar Slytherin. That alone gave him something no other student had, the ability to speak Parseltongue. This gift let him uncover a passage hidden behind a sink in the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, a place students passed every day without knowing the monster that slept below their feet. Riddle opened the chamber. He spoke to the creature inside, a monstrous serpent known as a basilisk, with fangs laced in venom and eyes that killed with a glance. The beast needed only a command. Riddle gave it one. "Purge the school," he whispered in the language of snakes. The victim was a young girl named Myrtle Warren, a quiet, awkward student. She died alone in a bathroom, and Tom, with cold calculation, watched his plan unfold. But it wasn't only murder, it was transformation. Killing Myrtle was Riddle's first deliberate step into the dark arts of soul-splitting. He used her death to create his first Horcrux, an enchanted diary that contained part of his soul. That diary would resurface decades later, almost killing Ginny Weasley and revealing to Harry Potter the truth of what Voldemort once was. As Riddle wrote in the diary, "I preserved the diary in order to one day show to the world that I, Tom Riddle, had discovered the secret of the chamber before anyone else. The most chilling part? No one suspected him, not even when the attacks happened. Riddle framed another student, Rubeus Hagrid, blaming his pet Acromantula. The plan worked. Hagrid was expelled, the chamber sealed, and Tom Riddle left behind a legend soaked in lies, a monster hidden in stone, a name that hadn't yet become Voldemort but already had the same hunger for fear, control, and death. Number 15. The murder of his own family. On a summer day, in the quiet village of Little Hangleton, the grandeur of the Riddle house stood in contrast to the silence that surrounded it. That day, a chill seeped into the ancient stone walls, not from the weather, but from something far more sinister. It was on this day that the boy once known as Tom Marvolo Riddle committed one of the darkest acts of his youth, the cold-blooded murder of his own Muggle father and grandparents. It was not done in a fit of passion, nor in the fog of confusion. It was a calculated, emotionless execution by a teenage wizard who had already begun severing ties with his own humanity. Tom Riddle had learned the truth about his heritage during his years at Hogwarts. He discovered that his father, Tom Riddle Sr., had been a wealthy and proud Muggle who had fallen for a witch named Gaunt only because he had been ensnared by a love potion. When the enchantment broke and Merop revealed her true identity and her pregnancy, he had abandoned her without hesitation. This knowledge burned within the young Tom like acid. The boy who had always felt unwanted, orphaned, and unloved now had a face and a name to blame for his pain. And in true Riddle fashion, he did not mourn. He planned. By the time Tom Riddle turned 16, he had already gained the trust of many at Hogwarts. Professors praised his intelligence, and fellow students admired his poise. Yet behind the mask of the model pupil lay a growing darkness that only a few could sense, Dumbledore among them. It was in his 6th year that Tom sought a deeper understanding of the soul, of power, of immortality. He asked Professor Slughorn about Horcruxes, and in a moment of fatal weakness, Slughorn told him what he wished to know. That same year, Tom Riddle decided to act on his hatred. The summer break offered him the time and opportunity to strike. Tom left the orphanage and made his way to Little Hangleton. His destination, the Riddle house, a place he had never seen but felt intimately connected to. Inside, his paternal grandparents, Thomas and Mary Riddle, and his estranged father, Tom Riddle Sr., lived in relative comfort, oblivious to the force of vengeance that was approaching. The family employed a gardener, Frank Bryce, a veteran of the Second World War who kept to himself and who would, in time, become the scapegoat for the crime about to be committed. The murder itself was swift and precise. Tom Riddle, already proficient in magic far beyond his years, used the killing curse, Avada Kedavra. The green flash of death, silent and immediate, left no trace of violence on the victims. The three riddles were found sitting at the dinner table, eyes wide open, expressions frozen in shock. As the books later described it, the riddles all appeared to be in perfect health, apart from the fact that they were all dead. This eerie stillness confused Muggle authorities, for no cause of death could be determined. Tom Riddle left no evidence behind. He returned to Hogwarts, seemingly untouched by the horror he had orchestrated. Frank Bryce, who had seen a mysterious teenager enter the property, became the prime suspect. The local police questioned him, and though they had no proof, suspicion clung to him for decades. Meanwhile, the true killer, their own blood, continued his ascent into legend and infamy. The murder of the Riddle family was not merely an act of revenge, it was a ritual of transformation. Tom was not content with their deaths alone. He used this triple killing as the dark sacrifice required to create his first Horcrux, the diary. This object, later used to nearly reopen the Chamber of Secrets, was no ordinary keepsake. It was imbued with part of Riddle's soul, forever linking that summer's crime to his path toward immortality. He had learned to fracture his soul, and with it his capacity for empathy, guilt, and love. Years later, when Harry Potter encountered the memory of Tom Riddle in that very diary, he stood face to face with the charming and intelligent boy who had already committed murder. "I told you," the diary Riddle said with a glint of pride, "I was different, special." And indeed he was. While many students worried about exams or friendships, Riddle had already killed, already created a Horcrux, already cast aside the last fragments of his conscience. The village of Little Hangleton never recovered from the shadow of that day. Though the Riddles had not been beloved, their death cast a permanent gloom over the area. The Riddle house fell into disrepair, the windows boarded, the garden overgrown. Frank Bryce remained a recluse, never quite escaping the cloud of suspicion. The locals avoided him and the house, whispering stories they barely believed but dared not challenge. The irony, of course, was bitter. Bryce was the only innocent in a story born of generational cruelty. What makes this moment in Tom Riddle's life so horrifying is not just the violence of the act, but the purposefulness of it. These were not crimes of desperation. He did not kill for survival. He killed for power. He killed to sever the tie to his Muggle ancestry. He killed to feel control. And in doing so, he took the first irreversible step toward becoming the Dark Lord. It's important to understand the psychological weight of this moment. Tom Riddle's identity was forged in rejection, his mother's death, his father's abandonment, his life in the orphanage. But rather than internalize that pain as sorrow, he converted it into fury, and more than fury, purpose. He sought to erase every trace of what he perceived as weakness, love, humility, Muggle blood. The Riddles were not just victims of a boy's wrath, they were sacrifices on an altar of ambition. Number 16, The Cursed Ring. Of all of the dark chapters that compose the life of Tom Marvolo Riddle, few are as haunting and symbolic as his pursuit of the ring once worn by his grandfather, Marvolo Gaunt. Long before he transformed into the feared Lord Voldemort, Tom was already chasing the shadows of his bloodline, obsessed with the notion of greatness passed through generations, as if power was etched into his very bones. He did not merely seek to understand his ancestry, he sought to consume it, to become it, to claim it as a divine right. The ring was more than a relic. It was the remnant of a cursed legacy, glistening with the weight of death, ambition, and forgotten magic. The Gaunt family, as descended from Salazar Slytherin himself, had fallen into squalor and madness by the time Tom began his search. Yet, in their ruin, he saw glory. Among the few possessions left behind by Marvolo Gaunt was a crude gold ring, adorned with a black stone etched with the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, a circle within a triangle crossed by a line. This, unknown to Tom, was no ordinary gem. It was the Resurrection Stone, one of the 3 legendary Hallows, capable, according to lore, of summoning the dead. But Tom, in his arrogance, never saw it for what it truly was. To him, it was a token of ancient nobility, a piece of his lineage, and nothing more. He found it hidden in the shack that once belonged to the Gaunts, buried among decaying wood and madness-soaked air. The ring still carried the curse of blood, Marvolo's rage, Morfin's delusions, and Merope's abandonment. When Tom slid the ring onto his finger, he felt not the power of resurrection, but the pull of something deeper. It was not love, or mourning, or longing. It was possession. The need to conquer that which belonged to others, especially if it belonged to the dead. His soul welcomed the ring, not as an heirloom, but as a prize. There was no reflection on the stone's meaning, no reverence for its hallow mark. To Tom, it was simply an object of power. He did not believe in fables, only in control. And what better use for such a treasure than to house a part of his fractured soul? At just 16, Tom had already committed murder to create his first Horcrux, his diary, and he was hungry to repeat the ritual. The ring was perfect. It bore the mark of his family. It was ancient, it was coveted, and thus it deserved to become a vessel of immortality. He murdered his own father, Tom Riddle Sr., to fuel the transformation. The act was brutal, deliberate, and final. He returned to Little Hangleton, stole into the ruined shack of his uncle Morfin, and took the ring. Then, in a quiet place where no one could see him, he performed the dark magic. The ring burned with new energy, not the energy of life, not the warmth of resurrection, but the cruel glow of a soul torn apart. It had become a Horcrux, a prison, a mirror of Tom's descent. Yet even in his triumph, Tom had overlooked a truth that would one day come back to him as a curse. The resurrection stone, though embedded in the ring, remained dormant to him. Its power required something Voldemort lacked: humility, grief, and love. In the tales of Beedle the Bard, the stone is described as summoning not the living, but the shadows of the dead. They remained silent and cold, and though he had brought them back into the world, they did not belong to it. This is something Tom never understood. He did not long for connection. He only wanted command. It is both ironic and fitting that Albus Dumbledore, the man who would become Tom's greatest adversary, was the one who recognized the truth of the ring. When Dumbledore eventually located the Horcrux many years later, he saw not just Voldemort's soul fragment, but the Hallow itself. In a moment of weakness, driven by personal grief and guilt, Dumbledore attempted to use the Resurrection Stone to see his lost family again: Ariana, his sister, his parents. He placed the ring on his finger and was immediately cursed. The magic woven into the ring as a Horcrux lashed out, nearly killing him. The irony was cruel. Tom had never discovered the true power of the ring, but the one man who did. Dumbledore paid the price for using it, and in that twist of fate lies the difference between them. Tom saw relics as tools. Dumbledore saw them as burdens. Tom never considered that the past was not something to dominate, but something to understand. You place too much importance, and you always have done, on the so-called purity of blood, Dumbledore once said to him scornfully. But Tom could never hear those words. Not truly. The ring remained hidden for years in the ruins of the Gaunt shack, warded by dark enchantments. When Dumbledore found it, he had to destroy the soul within, one of 7 fragments Voldemort had scattered across the world. It was no easy task. As Dumbledore later told Harry, it was, I think, the most dangerous Horcrux of all. And perhaps it was, not just because of its curse, but because of its symbolism. It was the centerpiece of Voldemort's delusion that by chaining himself to objects, he could defeat death. But the ring's story did not end with destruction. The Resurrection Stone was removed and later hidden by Dumbledore inside the golden snitch Harry would inherit. "I open at the close," read the message. And in that moment, Harry understood what Tom never did, that to face death was not to be weak, but to be whole. Harry used the stone not to command the dead, but to walk beside them as he approached his own death willingly. His parents, Sirius, Remus, all appeared as shades, just as the tale foretold. but their presence gave him strength, not control. Number 17, the rejected job at Hogwarts. There is a moment in the history of Hogwarts that reshaped its legacy forever. A single decision made within the shadowed stone walls of the castle set in motion a curse that would span decades. This is the story of Tom Riddle, not yet Lord Voldemort, and the fateful rejection that turned ambition into vengeance. Tom Riddle had always seen Hogwarts as more than a school. For him, it was a sanctuary, a place of power, and, most dangerously, a future he believed belonged to him. He excelled as a student, charming professors, outperforming his classmates, and becoming a prefect, and later, head boy. He was elegant in thought, meticulous in speech, and intoxicatingly persuasive. Professors like Horace Slughorn, who led the Slug Club, saw in him the potential of greatness. Yet even among those who admired him, Albus Dumbledore remained unconvinced. After graduating from Hogwarts, Riddle travelled far and wide, disappearing from public view. But when he returned years later, he was no longer the boy headmaster Armando Dippet once favoured. He was something else entirely, more refined, darker, and brimming with secrets he refused to share. It was then that he approached Dumbledore with a proposition. He wished to return to Hogwarts not as a visitor, but as the new professor of defence against the dark arts. It was a well-crafted request. Riddle knew the position had always been unstable, often filled by lesser talents who never lasted. He, of course, saw himself as its salvation. In his mind, it was a natural progression from student to master. He believed he could use the role to mould young minds, guide them as he saw fit, and build the loyal following he desired. What he did not anticipate was Dumbledore's refusal. Dumbledore saw through the request with piercing clarity. He knew the darkness that lived behind Riddle's charming facade. It had been there in his school years, in his obsession with rare magical artifacts, in his hunger for control, and in the strange disappearances that haunted his time as a student. When Dumbledore rejected him, it was not out of spite, but caution. Yet in that moment, Tom Riddle's wounded pride twisted into something far more dangerous. The rejection did more than anger him. It humiliated him. Hogwarts had been the one place he considered his own. Dumbledore's denial felt like exile. What followed was an act of quiet yet potent revenge. Riddle cursed the position. It was not theatrical, nor did he leave a visible mark. But from that day forward, the defence against the dark arts role became a cursed seat. No professor would ever last more than a single year. Though no official records confirm the existence of such a curse, the pattern was undeniable. The moment Dumbledore refused Riddle the post, the chaos began. The succession of teachers who followed over the years proved the strange pattern. Professor Quirinus Quirrell, the nervous and stuttering scholar, met his end after housing the Dark Lord himself. Gilderoy Lockhart, famed for lies and false glory, lost his memory and mind. Remus Lupin, though beloved by students, was outed as a werewolf and forced to resign. Even Mad-Eye Moody, though technically impersonated by Barty Crouch Jr., only lasted a year in the role before exposure. Riddle's curse did not simply remove professors, it exposed their flaws, shattered their secrets, and drove them away in disgrace or ruin. It was as if the position itself rejected permanence, twisted by an unseen hand. Hogwarts became a revolving door of guardians in a subject that mattered more than ever. The true cruelty of the curse lay not in its destruction, but in its irony. Riddle, who would become Voldemort, had mastered the dark arts beyond comprehension. And yet no one could remain long enough at Hogwarts to teach students how to defend themselves against that very darkness. The position most needed in the fight against him was rendered eternally unstable. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore reveals the truth to Harry in a quiet moment. He speaks not only of the curse, but of the man who cast it. Lord Voldemort did not come to Hogwarts to teach, he said. He came to find something, to control something. Dumbledore had not simply rejected an applicant, he had thwarted an attempt to dominate the school from within. There are rumours, of course, that Riddle's visit had more than one purpose. During that same visit, he is believed to have hidden one of his Horcruxes within the castle, Ravenclaw's lost diadem concealed in the room of requirement. The rejection may have set the curse, but his larger plan had already taken root. This intertwining of revenge and ambition was Riddle's legacy. His curse was not just a magical affliction, it was psychological warfare. Each new professor arrived under the shadow of failure. They inherited the dread of their predecessors, knowing the fate that awaited them. And so the subject of defense against the dark arts was never given the consistency it required. Riddle had succeeded in sabotaging the very knowledge that could threaten him. The position came to symbolize something more than an educational role. It became a test of will, of strength, of resistance to corruption. And yet one by one each professor fell. Even Severus Snape, perhaps the most competent of them all, only held the position for a single year, just before the final war began. It seemed no one was exempt, not even those most loyal to Dumbledore's cause. There is a particularly grim irony in the fact that the only person to ever hold the position for longer than a year was Tom Riddle himself, though not officially. His influence remained long after his visit. The room, the curse, and the fear, they were all his. Even in absence, he taught the school a lesson, that darkness, once invited, is not easily expelled. The fear of the cursed role shaped generations of students. Parents grew uneasy. Headmasters struggled to find applicants. Some, like Professor Dippet, denied the existence of any curse, calling it coincidence. Others, like Minerva McGonagall, later admitted the pattern was undeniable. Hogwarts, for all its ancient power, was at the mercy of a boy it once nurtured. Number 18. The Rise of the Death Eaters. It began in the echoing halls of Hogwarts, long before the world would tremble at the name Voldemort. When he was still Tom Marvolo Riddle, a quiet, impeccably polite boy with dark eyes and a strange intensity, the seeds of his dark empire had already taken root. He was only a student, yet already gathering followers, not through overt command, but through an uncanny power that pulled others into his orbit. It wasn't just his intelligence, though that was undeniable, nor was it only his magical talent, which exceeded the expectations of every professor. It was his ability to create belief in his superiority, in his vision, in his inevitable rise. That, even more than magic, was the real source of his early influence. By his 5th year, Riddle was more than a prefect. He was a figure of whispered admiration among Slytherins. A student who spoke little of his past, but whose presence seemed shaped by ancient secrets. Those closest to him knew he could speak to snakes, an art so rare it was mistaken by many for myth. He never flaunted this gift, but neither did he hide it completely. Instead, he let others discover it accidentally, always ensuring the result was awe rather than fear. He understood the power of mystery, of suggestion, of allowing others to fill in the blanks with their own reverence. Many of those who would later call themselves Death Eaters first gathered around him during those years, drawn not only by ambition, but by ideology. He began carefully recruiting those most likely to believe in the superiority of pure bloodlines, a belief Riddle himself professed, though he, paradoxically, was a half-blood. Students like Avery and Mulciber, children of proud magical families, found themselves invited to clandestine meetings where Riddle would pose questions that seemed innocent. What if the ministry were cleansed of its corruption? Or, do you not think wizardkind deserves better than to bow before muggle ignorance? These ideas took root in the hearts of boys eager for greatness. The transformation of those students from mere followers to fanatics was not instant. It was cultivated over years, nourished by fear and admiration. One such example was Antonin Dolohov, known even then for his ruthlessness in the dueling club. Dolohov had always possessed a cruel streak, but under Riddle's influence it became refined, weaponized. Riddle never encouraged brutality openly. Instead, he praised discipline, ambition, and loyalty, values he knew would evolve into something darker when placed in the right soil. Dolohov, like others, came to see cruelty as necessary, not for personal gain, but for the future Riddle painted so vividly. Barty Crouch Jr. was not of Riddle's generation, but his descent into darkness mirrored those early followers. What linked them all was not just ideology, but a willingness to surrender their identity to the cause. They did not serve Tom Riddle, not in their eyes. They served something greater, an ideal, a future of order and strength. Riddle ensured they never saw themselves as mere pawns. "We are not Death Eaters," he once told them in those early days. "We are the architects of a new world." The name came later, but the mindset was already formed. One of the earliest known meetings took place deep within the Forbidden Forest, far from the prying eyes of professors. Riddle, using charms to mask their presence, would lead his chosen few in rituals not taught at Hogwarts. They were not always magical rituals, sometimes they were symbolic. Oaths sworn over fire, secrets exchanged in blood. It was all theatre, but theatre with purpose. Each act further bound the group to one another and to him. Loyalty ceased to be a virtue, it became a requirement for survival. Abraxas Malfoy, grandfather of Draco, was among those early converts. His involvement has long been suppressed in the public records, but memories and rumours endure. Abraxas, a boy of pride and cunning, saw in Riddle the same cold ambition he harboured himself. For Riddle, Malfoy was a trophy, a pureblood of influence who could open doors within the aristocratic magical circles. Through Abraxas, Tom Riddle began building not just an army, but a network, one that would grow into the shadowy infrastructure of the Death Eaters. Even in his youth, Riddle understood that power was not taken only through magic. Influence, control, persuasion. These were the real tools of domination. He carefully studied the staff of Hogwarts, noting their weaknesses. He charmed Professor Slughorn, extracting connections and favours. He manipulated Professor Dippet with humility and apparent respect. Only Dumbledore remained immune to his charm, and Riddle never forgave that. But even Dumbledore underestimated how deeply the boy's influence had spread within the school's walls. "He was the most brilliant student Hogwarts ever had," Horace Slughorn would later say. "He knew it, we all did. But brilliance alone does not explain how a group of ambitious children became murderers cloaked in black. The truth lies in how Riddle fed their hunger for greatness. He never asked them to obey. Instead, he made them believe that to follow him was to fulfill their destiny. When Lucius Malfoy, not yet a Death Eater, first met Voldemort years later, he bowed not to a tyrant but to a visionary whose legend had already begun in the common room of Slytherin. There is a passage in Half-Blood Prince that perfectly illustrates the magnetic power Riddle held even as a boy. Dumbledore recounts visiting young Tom at the orphanage. "I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me," Tom had said. "I can make them hurt if I want to." But even then there was no trace of remorse, only fascination. That same cold curiosity would later manifest in his followers, who learned from him that morality was malleable. Pain, if it served a purpose, was no sin. Death, if it brought order, was not a crime. Bellatrix Black, the most fervent of Voldemort's followers, was not present in those early days, but her madness was a mirror of the loyalty Riddle first inspired at Hogwarts. She, like the others, did not love Voldemort. She worshipped him. That difference, subtle as it may seem, is the line between obedience and fanaticism. And it was a line Riddle had long since mastered. When his followers knelt, they did so not from fear, but from reverence, the kind born only of years of belief. The name Death Eaters emerged in the years following his departure from Hogwarts during the first rise of his dark regime. But the foundation was laid among green-trimmed robes and candle-lit dungeons. By the time he left school, Riddle had not only split his soul, but split his identity. He was no longer Tom. He had become an idea, a symbol, a cause, and those who had known him as a boy embraced the transformation. To them, the name Voldemort was not a betrayal of his past. It was the fulfillment of it. There is a chilling detail buried in the pensive memory from Dumbledore's collection. Riddle, as a young man, returned to Hogwarts not to reminisce, but to request the position of defense against the dark arts professor. He was denied, of course, but the visit was revealing. In that moment, the circle closed. The boy who had recruited followers in the shadows of the castle sought now to formalize his dominion over it. When he left, Dumbledore noted, a curse was left behind. No defense against the dark arts professor would hold the post for more than a year. Symbolic? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was the final spell of a boy who had claimed Hogwarts as his crucible. Not every follower came willingly. Some, like Severus Snape, were drawn in through different means. For Snape it was not ideology but desperation, rejection, and the illusion of control. He too had been a student marked by isolation and talent. And like Riddle, he knew the taste of exclusion. Voldemort exploited that pain, offering belonging where the world had offered only scorn. Snape's story is a tragic echo of Riddle's, a reflection of what might have been had the latter possessed even a shred of empathy. Regulus Black, younger brother of Sirius, also joined the ranks of the Death Eaters. But his heart rebelled. His defection, though fatal, was a rare moment of redemption in that dark lineage. He too had likely heard the tales of Tom Riddle, the Slytherin prodigy. But unlike many, he saw beyond the legend and recognized the horror beneath the glamour. His story is a reminder that not all who followed were lost. Some, even too late, chose defiance. Throughout the Goblet of Fire, we learn more about the structure of the Death Eaters. Their secrecy, their signs, the dark mark, all these were born from the culture Riddle established at Hogwarts. A culture where loyalty was absolute, betrayal was death, and doubt was weakness. These symbols were not random. They were sacred emblems of a twisted faith, one founded not on love or justice, but on conquest and purity. Perhaps the most terrifying truth is that it worked. For a time, the world bent to Voldemort's will. The ministry faltered, the order suffered, and entire families vanished. But those dark days were not the result of one man's power alone. They were the fruit of seeds planted in adolescence, watered by ambition, and shielded by charisma. The Death Eaters were not monsters born fully formed. They were children who believed in a boy who promised them glory. In the end, that may be Tom Riddle's greatest magic. Not the killing curse, not Horcruxes, not immortality, but his power to convince others that by following him, they were not surrendering, they were rising. The boy who walked the halls of Hogwarts alone did not crave friendship but obedience. And in the end, he found it. Even today, remnants of that first circle remain. They are old, broken, some imprisoned, some hidden. But the stories endured, of midnight meetings, of whispered vows, of a boy with dark eyes who said, with certainty, that greatness was not given, it was taken. And they believed him. They always believed. Number 19, Travels and Disappearance. Tom Riddle's rejection from Hogwarts did not mark a period of reflection, but rather a moment of liberation. When Albus Dumbledore, then newly appointed headmaster, refused to grant him the position of defense against the dark arts professor, Tom did not linger. He had already begun his descent into darkness, but this refusal became the final catalyst. Deprived of the symbolic return to the place of his former glory, he vanished from the well-known paths of the magical world and began a long, winding journey, one that would leave behind any remnants of the boy he had once been. He was no longer interested in public appearances or social favor. No longer did he charm his way into people's hearts or leave them spellbound with graceful smiles. The world began to forget the name Tom Marvolo Riddle, and instead would one day tremble at a new name, Lord Voldemort. The transformation, however, was not immediate. It took years of searching, wandering, and reshaping his soul through unspeakable acts. With each step away from the wizarding world's gaze, he shed another part of his humanity. In those early years after the rejection, Riddle ventured far beyond the British Isles. His path took him through the forgotten alleys of Eastern Europe, the crumbling ruins of magical civilizations and ancient forests whispered to be cursed. He sought knowledge not kept in books but etched into stone, buried in blood rituals and preserved in forbidden tombs. Albania became a focal point of his dark pilgrimage. Remote and steeped in shadows, it was here that Riddle first encountered remnants of ancient dark magic that the ministry had long turned a blind eye to. It was also here, in the thick woods and mist-shrouded hills, that he would one day return in spirit, broken but not destroyed. During this time, he made contact with the last living heirs of forgotten magical bloodlines. In Romania, he met the reclusive descendants of the House of Draculesti, pure-blooded witches who had lived in isolation since the fall of their vampire-ridden dynasty. He did not go as a guest, he went as a predator, charming, studying, and ultimately stealing what he needed. By the time he left their fortress, 3 of their grimoires were missing, and one of the sisters had mysteriously disappeared. Rumors spread, but no one dared confront the silent storm passing through Eastern Europe. Riddle spent considerable time in the ruins of Nurmengard, the prison built by Gellert Grindelwald. He did not go to meet the prisoner, at least not then, but instead explored the vaults of Grindelwald's former empire. Where others feared to tread, Riddle walked confidently. He studied Grindelwald's rise and fall, and where Grindelwald had once preached unity through dominance, Riddle found only fuel for his own philosophy of conquest through fear. He took from Grindelwald's legacy the aesthetics of power, but none of the ideology. There is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it, he had once told Horace Slughorn, and now he lived by that creed. He was seen in Egypt in 1954 under a false name, investigating tombs that even the magical authorities had sealed off due to their danger. One of the tombs had been the final resting place of Queen Nitocris, a rumoured sorceress queen who was said to have cursed her bloodline and kept her magic trapped in cursed objects. Within weeks of his visit, a sandstorm ravaged the area. The tomb's guardians were found dead under mysterious circumstances, and Nitocris's wand, a long, emerald-tipped relic, was never seen again. Riddle's obsession with Horcruxes intensified during these years. According to Dumbledore's later observations, it was likely during this period that he created the majority of them. He had already transformed his diary during his school years. Now he sought further fragmentation. In the mountains of Greece, he tracked down the remnants of the oracle's cave at Delphi, which had once been used by magical seers long before it fell silent. There, it said, he used the life of a blind seeress to fuel the creation of another Horcrux, this time embedding it into Helga Hufflepuff's cup, which he had stolen from Hepzibah Smith years earlier. No place was sacred to him, no life too valuable. In his pursuit, Riddle desecrated temples and burned sacred groves. He knew that to ascend beyond mortality, he had to become something unrecognizable, unholy, unnatural, and untouched by the laws of magic and men. His humanity, already hollowed by his orphan childhood and lust for greatness, now became something he viewed as a liability. He taught himself not to feel regret or shame. Remorse, the only known destroyer of Horcruxes, had no place in his soul. His appearance changed gradually but drastically. Where once he had been handsome and pale, with sharp features and dark eyes, his face began to narrow, the skin stretch, the pupils slit. Lord Voldemort has never been seen again at Hogwarts since that time, Dumbledore once said, and when he did return, he was a monster. But it was not magic alone that transformed him. It was choice, repetition, and cruelty honed to a science. One of his most pivotal visits during these years was to the Gaunt shack in Little Hangleton, where he solidified his connection to Salazar Slytherin's bloodline and used the ring of Marvolo Gaunt to create another Horcrux. This act would eventually prove to be a fatal misstep. The ring, cursed and infused with deadly magic, would be discovered by Dumbledore decades later, nearly costing him his life. The ring carried a curse so powerful it had survived centuries, said Dumbledore, and it was the creation of this Horcrux that showed just how far Voldemort had gone in seeking immortality. There were years when no one saw him. Whispers circulated among the darker alleys of Nocturne Alley, and his name was muttered only by the most deranged or the most ambitious. Some believed he had perished, others thought he had become one with the shadows. In reality, he was evolving. Like a serpent shedding its skin, Riddle was discarding the last human remnants of Tom, the student, the orphan, the boy. In 1966, a few years before his official return to Britain, he made a final pilgrimage to Albania. There, in the forests near Lake Shkodra, he found a cave beneath the roots of an ancient yew tree, a place so imbued with darkness that even the animals refused to tread near it. This became a sanctuary of sorts, a resting place for one of his Horcruxes, and a fortress in spirit where he would later hide as a wraith after his body was destroyed by the rebounding curse that failed to kill Harry Potter. When Voldemort fell during the attack on the Potters in 1981, it was this location in Albania that called him back. Weak, bodiless, and near death, he clung to that place like a parasite. I was ripped from my body, less than spirit, less than the meanest ghost, but still I was alive, he confessed later. His survival, made possible by the Horcruxes he had created during his dark travels, ensured that death would not claim him. Not yet. The transformation of Tom Riddle into Lord Voldemort was not an overnight phenomenon. It was a calculated, ruthless campaign against his own mortality. Each step on foreign soil, each act of sacrificial murder, and each spell whispered in forgotten tongues was part of that metamorphosis. And though the world would later learn of his return, few truly understood how long he had been preparing for it. Dumbledore, always a silent observer of Riddle's descent, had once warned the Ministry. He disappeared after being refused the defense against the Dark Arts post, and he has been doing something terrible. But even Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, could not have known the full extent. Voldemort did not merely vanish, he unmade himself, and in his place stood a being who could not be bargained with, reasoned with, or defeated by conventional means. The Dark Lord who would one day command giants, werewolves, and legions of Death Eaters was born in the solitude of these forgotten places. He carved himself into legend through silence, through shadow, through patience. Every year away from the eyes of the world was a year spent perfecting his power, his immortality, his fearsome legacy. Years later, when Harry Potter would stand before his enemy in the Forbidden Forest, he was not facing the boy once named Tom Riddle. He was facing the sum of decades of cruelty, sacrifice, and obsession. The boy had long since ceased to exist, burned away by the fires of ambition and the dark magic that fed his rise. This period of disappearance, therefore, must never be viewed as an interlude in Voldemort's life. It was the making of him. Without those lost years, there would be no Dark Lord, only an ambitious, bitter man clinging to a vision of greatness. But Tom Riddle was never content with ambition. He wanted to be feared. He wanted to be eternal. And so he became a myth long before he returned to the world that had once dismissed him. Even now, the places he touched bear his mark. The Albanian forest is said to remain cold even in summer. The tomb in Egypt has never been found again, and the few remaining records from his travels are locked away in the Department of Mysteries, sealed by laws that forbid even their mention. Perhaps it is better that way. For what Riddle unearthed in those years is not knowledge meant for human minds, nor spells meant to be spoken by any wizard again. Number 20, dual personality. From the moment young Tom Marvolo Riddle stepped through the iron gates of Wool's orphanage, the air seemed to change around him. He was quiet, observant, even charming when he wished to be. The matron, Mrs. Cole, described him as a funny boy, always polite, but not quite right. There was something too controlled about his smile, too exact in his speech. Yet none could deny the impression he left behind, refined, intelligent, above his peers. What few ever saw was the fire flickering just beneath the surface. Cold, calculating, dangerous. At 11, when Albus Dumbledore visited the orphanage to offer Tom a place at Hogwarts, the boy's room already bore signs of his split nature. Stolen trinkets hidden in a box under the bed, a caged sense of superiority, an obsessive hunger to dominate even in small things. He was not surprised to learn he was a wizard. He had always known he was different, better, powerful. He confessed to Dumbledore without a flicker of guilt that he could make animals do what he wanted, make people hurt, and that he enjoyed it. But even then he maintained his mask, formal, polite, and disarmingly poised. When Tom arrived at Hogwarts, he stepped into the Great Hall not as a wide-eyed child, but as a tactician. Sorted into Slytherin, he quickly rose in popularity. Professors praised him as a prodigy, students admired his elegance and sharp mind. Slughorn referred to him as the most brilliant student Hogwarts has ever seen. To the world, he was a model pupil. He earned awards for magical merit and became a prefect, later, even head boy. But even as he accepted accolades with a graceful nod, he was laying the foundations for his true self, the one that watched from behind those dark eyes. By his 5th year, Tom had already opened the Chamber of Secrets and released the basilisk upon the school. He murdered Myrtle Warren, the shy girl in the bathroom, and framed Rubeus Hagrid to avoid suspicion. Yet he attended classes as usual, aced his exams, and hosted pleasant conversations with professors. The duality was striking: a student who, hours after committing murder, would discuss magical theory with a glint of curiosity in his voice. His crimes were precise, planned, devoid of emotion. He wore humanity like a cloak, removable at will. Horace Slughorn, perhaps the only teacher who grew suspicious, recalled an evening when Tom asked about Horcruxes. "I don't know anything about such dark magic," Slughorn had said nervously, but the boy pressed. "Just hypothetical, of course," Tom assured him, smiling with that same refined calm. But behind the smile was a different beast, one that already knew too much, already considered murder a path to immortality. The Tom who sipped wine and charmed his teacher was not the same one who later slit his best friend's throat to rip his soul in two. After graduation, Tom requested a position at Hogwarts, the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. When denied, he did not protest. He simply smiled and walked away. Yet the moment marked a turning point. Dumbledore noted it later. From that day, the position became cursed. No teacher has lasted more than a year since. It was not rejection that wounded Tom. It was that his carefully cultivated charm had failed. His mask had slipped, if only slightly. The darkness, always close to the surface, had pulsed too visibly. Tom Riddle's duality was not madness, but strategy. He chose when to be the polished heir of Salazar Slytherin, and when to be the shadow that moved in silence through the night. He charmed Hepzibah Smith into trusting him with her most precious possessions, Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket, before poisoning her and framing her house elf. She had laughed at his compliments, unaware that behind his smooth demeanour was a heart as cold as the poison he slipped into her tea. In her death, he found the material for 2 more Horcruxes. The creation of each Horcrux amplified the fracture in his soul. With every act of murder, a piece of Tom's humanity vanished. In the words of Horace Slughorn, killing rips the soul apart. Tom had not merely ripped it. He had shattered it deliberately again and again until only fragments remained. Each artifact, the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, became vessels of a new identity. Tom Riddle began to vanish, and in his place emerged something else entirely. The name Tom Riddle began to feel obsolete to him. It carried the weight of mortality, of origin. He needed a name that would erase his half-blood lineage, his muggle father, the orphanage, the shame of his birth. He rearranged the letters of his name and forged a new identity. I am Lord Voldemort. This was not just a title. It was a severance from the past, a declaration that the mask was no longer needed. The young man who once shook hands with teachers was now a ghost, the smile replaced by silence, the warmth by ice. His former classmates, those who once sat beside him in lessons, no longer recognized the being he became. When he gathered followers, the Death Eaters, he no longer led with charm, but with fear. Bellatrix, Lestrange, Rodolphus, Mulciber, they obeyed, not because they loved him, but because he wielded terror like a sword. Yet there were moments, fleeting, strange, when traces of Tom Riddle glimmered beneath the surface. When he visited the Gaunt shack, his father's grave, or Hogwarts itself, it was not Voldemort who lingered there. It was the orphan boy, still searching for roots even as he destroyed them. Even in the height of his power, Voldemort retained a twisted form of refinement. He spoke eloquently, moved with grace, and kept his image meticulously controlled. But now his gestures were accompanied by silence that crackled with menace. His eyes burned with unnatural fire. As Dumbledore said, he was a boy who grew up believing he was special. And he was, but he chose to be feared, not loved. The duality had ceased to be a balance. The darker self had consumed the other. The diary of Ginny Weasley, Tom's first Horcrux, offers a rare glimpse into the transition. Through its pages, the shade of young Tom Riddle speaks, eloquent, persuasive, even sympathetic. He gains Ginny's trust by pretending to understand her pain, by whispering secrets, by being everything a lonely girl needs. But as the entries progress, his tone shifts, the kindness curdles, he takes her strength, her will, her life. Ginny poured out her soul to me, and her soul happened to be exactly what I needed, he writes. The predator hidden in the poet finally strikes. What's most chilling is how deliberately he drew this line between the mask and the monster. There was no inner turmoil, no flicker of remorse. Tom Riddle did not struggle with his identity. He mastered it. He manipulated it. He curated his personas as tools, the polite boy, the brilliant student, the loyal friend, and discarded them the moment they were no longer useful. He was, in essence, an actor playing roles he wrote for himself, all in service of a single goal: dominion over death. His duality reached its final expression during the Battle of Hogwarts. There, standing in the ruins of the castle that once praised him, he was neither student nor lord. He was both, and neither. He offered Harry Potter a chance to live, as he had once offered Dumbledore a lie. He summoned his Death Eaters with the voice of command, but beneath it trembled a fury of a boy denied. He called Snape faithful, and yet betrayed him moments later. The contradictions had not faded, they had calcified. In the end, it was not magic that defeated Lord Voldemort, it was love, trust, and loyalty. Things Tom Riddle had always dismissed as weaknesses, and perhaps that was the greatest tragedy of his split self. He saw humanity as something to be hidden, then something to be lost, and finally something to be destroyed. But it was the very thing that made others powerful, in ways he could never understand. Tom's legacy, sealed in the memories of those who knew both sides of him, remains a chilling lesson. Not all monsters are born with claws. Some wear smiles, speak in honeyed words, and hold books in their hands. Some are charming boys with perfect manners who ask about ancient magic after dinner. Some monsters are built from masks, masks so perfect that even they forget what lies beneath. The mirror of Erised, if placed before Tom Riddle in his youth, would not have shown a crown or an army. It would have shown a boy standing alone, triumphant, eternal, untouched by death or doubt. But as Dumbledore warned, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Tom Riddle never truly lived. He existed between two selves, one who desired power and one who pretended to be human. And that is the final truth of his duality. He was not a soul torn apart by accident. He was a boy who saw the world's masks and believed they were real, so he made his own. He wore them until the mirror showed nothing at all, not Tom, not Voldemort, just emptiness. Number 21, hatred for muggles. Tom Riddle never chose to be born to a muggle father, but from the earliest days of his life it seemed as though destiny had already carved into his soul a bitter rejection of the very world he came from. The walls of Wool's orphanage, grey and cold, held no affection, no warmth, and certainly no magic. But more than the absence of comfort, what lingered in those walls was the heavy stench of ordinariness, of powerlessness. And to young Tom that stench became synonymous with muggles. Even before he knew he was a wizard, Tom understood in the marrow of his being that he was not like the others. The other children, loud, messy, and unremarkable, avoided him. They feared him. Not just for his strange silences or the cruel precision of his pranks, but because they sensed, in some inarticulate way, that Tom was watching them like a predator studies its prey, and Tom, for his part, came to see them as lesser creatures. Not just because he could make their toys float or animals obey him without touch or word, but because in his eyes they lived in shadows while he carried a light they couldn't even perceive. Mrs. Cole, the matron of the orphanage, often remarked that Tom was unusual. She would nervously recount to visiting officials that things happened around him, disturbing things. Once, a boy named Billy Stubbs, who had been bullying Tom, was found dangling upside down from the rafters in the attic, screaming in terror. Another time, a rabbit beloved by a girl named Amy Benson was discovered dead in its hutch, eyes wide with fear, though the cage had not been opened. To the staff, these were strange coincidences. To Tom, they were proof that muggles were weak, fragile things. They bled, they cried, they feared. When Albus Dumbledore first visited the orphanage in 1938, he found not a frightened child eager to understand his magical identity, but a boy already hardened, already cold. Dumbledore later recalled, "I met him when he was 11. He was already highly self-sufficient, secretive, and, I must admit, very talented. But even then, I could see a shadow. That shadow was hate, deep, raw, instinctive hate for the non-magical world, a hatred that had grown not from influence or ideology, but from lived experience and festering emotion." Tom's discovery that he was a wizard did not spark joy. It confirmed a suspicion. He was special, different, better. "There's no such thing as magic," he had once hissed to the other children, though he knew even then it wasn't true. Magic, he realized, wasn't just a gift, it was proof of a hierarchy. And in his hierarchy, muggles belonged beneath the dirt. Though he was accepted into Hogwarts, a world that finally reflected his gifts, Tom never let go of his disgust for the non-magical world. While other students from muggle families marveled at the talking portraits or the shifting staircases, Tom watched them with barely concealed disdain. He wore his Slytherin robes like armor and absorbed the house's philosophy of purity not as a suggestion, but as truth. It is often misunderstood that Tom Riddle's hatred for muggles stemmed from Slytherin teachings or from absorbing ideology at Hogwarts, but that's far from the truth. Salazar Slytherin's disdain for muggleborns might have given Tom a framework, but the foundation had been laid long before. The orphanage taught him that muggles were bullies and victims, never equals, and more importantly, they were helpless against what he could become. Despite this contempt, Tom hid his beliefs with masterful charm. Teachers admired him. Slughorn, head of Slytherin House, spoke of him fondly in later years, calling him brilliant, if a little intense. But Tom never allowed his hatred to erupt, not yet. He bided his time, collected power, and planted seeds. In his 5th year, he opened the Chamber of Secrets, unleashing the basilisk upon muggle-borns. One girl died, Myrtle Warren, struck down in a bathroom stall, her glasses left cracked beside her lifeless body. The school nearly closed, but Tom covered his tracks with masterful deceit, framing Hagrid and his pet Acromantula. The death of a muggle-born was not a tragedy to him, it was a message. Tom's obsession with blood purity grew in the shadows. He researched his lineage and discovered the truth that explained his own horror. His father, Tom Riddle Sr., was a muggle, a handsome, wealthy, but entirely non-magical man who had been seduced through a love potion by Gaunt, a witch from a crumbling bloodline. Tom saw his own birth as a humiliation, the product of weakness of a mother so desperate she relied on magical coercion. When the spell was broken and Riddle Sr. abandoned her, Merope died in childbirth. Tom grew up never knowing them, but what he imagined filled him with loathing. His father, he believed, had rejected magic, rejected him. And for that, he deserved death. In his 6th year, Tom visited the village of Little Hangleton. There, he confronted his Muggle father and grandparents. No one knows exactly what was said in that final confrontation, but what is known is that all 3 were found dead, murdered with the killing curse. The authorities never found the culprit. The crimes were blamed on the local vagrant, Morphin Gaunt, whose memory Tom had modified. For Tom, it wasn't just revenge, it was purification. He erased the stain of his Muggle blood with cold, magical precision. Dumbledore would later say, he showed no remorse, no sorrow. In killing his father, he rid himself of what he saw as the last tether to an unworthy past. It is here that Tom crossed the threshold, not just morally, but magically. Killing his Muggle father was not the final act, it was the first. He would soon divide his soul, crafting the first Horcrux, the diary into which he poured the memory of his younger self and the hatred that drove him. After graduating from Hogwarts, Tom vanished into the world, traveling far and wide. He studied the dark arts not merely to gain power, but to perfect a world-view. In the Albanian forests and the shadowy corridors of forgotten tombs, he found echoes of old wizards who also believed that magic should rule. But Tom was not interested in tradition. He wanted dominance. His ideology crystallized into a movement. When he returned, he no longer called himself Tom. He was Lord Voldemort, a name to strike fear, to erase the past, and to embody the future he envisioned, a world ruled by magic, purged of muggles and those tainted by their blood. The Death Eaters, his followers, were hand-picked from those who shared his belief or could be bent to it. Lucius Malfoy, Bellatrix Lestrange, and others followed him not just out of fear, but out of alignment. They believed, as Voldemort did, that muggles were intruders in a magical world, that they were dangerous in their ignorance and unworthy in their nature. The First Wizarding War erupted not from a thirst for power alone, but from this hatred forged in childhood. Voldemort's Muggle roots made his ideology more personal, more violent. He was not a distant aristocrat defending tradition. He was a rejected child, destroying his reflection. It is chilling that Voldemort never spared a thought for the irony of his crusade. Though he hunted down Muggleborns and persecuted Muggles, he himself was half-blood. But in his mind, that half had been burned away in fire. He often referred to Muggles as filth and vermin. During the Second Wizarding War, he placed the Ministry of Magic under his control and ordered the formation of the Muggle-born Registration Commission, headed by Dolores Umbridge. Innocent witches and wizards were interrogated, imprisoned, and in some cases executed, all because their parents were non-magical. This regime of fear did not merely target Muggles, it dehumanized them. In the forest before the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort referred to Harry as the boy who has come to die. But his tone wasn't anger, it was disdain. To Voldemort, Harry's defiance was not heroic, it was impertinent. A half-blood like him, refusing to submit, was an insult, even more so because Harry had been raised by Muggles and had learned compassion from them. And it is here that the true heart of Voldemort's hatred reveals itself. Compassion was weakness, mercy was cowardice, love, that most human of emotions, was a liability. Muggles embodied all of it. They were, in his view, animals dressed as men. Without magic, they were blind and clumsy. With it, they were thieves, and so he hunted them, cursed them, mocked them. "There is no good and evil," he once said to Harry. "There is only power, and those too weak to seek it." In that single line, he captured his belief not just in superiority, but in the right to rule by might alone. Even after his final defeat, the legacy of Tom Riddle's hatred endured. The scars of his terror remained in the wizarding world. Families torn apart, bloodlines erased, children born in hiding. Muggle-borns who survived his reign bore not just fear but trauma, and those who once followed him were left to grapple with the truth that their cause had been born from the rage of a lonely boy in an orphanage, who had seen no love, only cruelty, and had vowed never to belong to that world again. Tom Riddle's hatred of Muggles was never abstract. It was rooted in pain, sharpened by intellect and wielded with precision. He did not hate them because he was told to. He hated them because they were a reminder, a reflection, a weakness he could never accept in himself. And so he burned the mirror. Number 22, manipulation and intimidation. Tom Riddle was not born into greatness, nor was he shaped by kindness. From the moment he was old enough to observe the world, he understood one thing with chilling clarity. People were tools, and fear was a lever. His life began in a bleak orphanage on Wolves Road in London, grey, cold, and filled with forgotten children. Yet even here, where affection was rare and suspicion plentiful, Tom found a way to stand above the rest. He didn't do it with kindness. He did it through calculated charm, cruel intelligence, and an innate talent for manipulation. The matron of the orphanage, Mrs. Cole, spoke of him with unease, even years later. Odd was the word she used, but it was never enough to describe the dread she couldn't explain. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He controlled. He had a way of making the other children fall in line. They obeyed not out of friendship or loyalty, but out of a quietly growing fear. Children whispered about a boy who could make things happen, a boy who once made a pet rabbit hang from the rafters, a boy who frightened Billy Stubbs into crying fits that lasted days, though no adult ever saw the act. He scares the other children, Mrs. Cole admitted to Dumbledore years later. But she could never prove why. What made Tom terrifying even as a child was his mastery of emotional leverage. He watched people with the intensity of a hawk, studied their weaknesses. When he wanted something, he never demanded it. He asked softly, with a certain stillness in his eyes that left no room for refusal. Then if someone resisted, things went wrong, very wrong. Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop, two children from the orphanage, were once taken to a seaside cave by Tom. They returned different, silent, hollow. They never spoke of what had happened there. No one could make them. But from that day, no child ever questioned Tom's commands again. When Tom arrived at Hogwarts at age 11, he carried no bags, no family, no love. But what he did carry was far more potent, the sharpened ability to adapt his facade. At Hogwarts, he learned that brute fear would not be enough. Here, in the majestic castle where magic flowed through the very walls, students had ambition, pride, secrets. So Tom became something else entirely, beloved. He was a star pupil, elegant in his speech, immaculate in his dress, respectful in manner, but never truly warm. Professors praised his brilliance. Students gravitated toward him. Slughorn, his potions master, collected him like a rare jewel, proud to have such a gifted young man in his slug club. But beneath this golden mask, the same manipulation worked its way into the cracks of Hogwarts life. Riddle's charisma became a velvet blade. He carefully chose his friends, those he called his favourites, yet none were truly close to him. They were pawns. Men like Avery and Mulciber, who would one day become Death Eaters, were flattered, elevated, then shaped into servants. They believed they had chosen him. But it was always Tom who had chosen them. He whispered possibilities into their ears, ideas of greatness, of purity, of strength. These ideas grew like seeds in the fertile ground of adolescent insecurity. One particular instance revealed the depth of Tom's manipulation. In his 5th year, a student named Myrtle Warren died in the second-floor girls' bathroom. Officially, it was an accident. The school was almost closed, but Dumbledore suspected otherwise. The truth, long buried, was that Tom had found the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, used the basilisk within, and orchestrated Myrtle's death, not out of impulse, but as a test, a demonstration, and no one ever traced it to him. He walked the halls as prefect, admired and respected, while a girl lay dead by his silent command. Even Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, admitted to feeling a sense of unease around young Tom. "I knew I was not dealing with a normal boy," he said later. But Riddle never broke any rules, at least not openly. He was clever enough to know that true power grows in shadows. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore reflects, "Lord Voldemort has never had a friend, nor do I believe that he has ever wanted one. He has only ever desired servants and followers." This was true even in his youth. Riddle knew the weight of silence. Often he would say nothing in response to a challenge or question, letting his stillness create unease. His eyes, cold and watchful, did the work for him. A glance from Tom could cause a boy to reconsider a joke, retract a statement, or leave a conversation mid-sentence. This was not magic, it was the power of presence, of psychological dominance. Tom was a master at this form of intimidation. He used words like spells, not incantations of Latin, but carefully chosen phrases that sunk into the minds of others. When speaking to Professor Slughorn about Horcruxes, he smiled. He asked questions gently, curiously, even innocently. But the implication behind his voice was always a step ahead of his age. Slughorn later confessed, "It was a very odd conversation. Riddle was brilliant, of course, but there was something unnatural about it." And yet at the time, Slughorn said nothing. Tom had made it feel like a privilege to be confided in, a rare honor. He twisted admiration into obedience. He made people feel special, just enough to tie their loyalty to him. But the moment they showed doubt or independence, he would withdraw that warmth. This absence, this sudden chill, terrified his followers more than any open threat. To lose Riddle's favor was to lose protection. That fear kept them close. It was a tactic he perfected into adulthood as Voldemort when his inner circle lived in constant dread of his displeasure. Tom's control extended even to how others spoke of him. He had a particular hatred for his father, Tom Riddle Sr., the muggle who abandoned his mother. When he returned to Little Hangleton during a school break, he murdered not only his father but his grandparents as well, using the killing curse. Then he used Morphin Gaunt's wand to frame him, altering the man's memory with such precision that the Ministry never suspected Riddle. It was his first act of true obliteration, not just of lives, but of the truth. The Gaunt ring, a family heirloom, became his first Horcrux, an artifact forged in manipulation and blood. Riddle's capacity for psychological warfare extended to magical manipulation. He excelled at legilimency, invading the thoughts and emotions of others. Though he never announced it, his skill in this discipline allowed him to anticipate reactions, exploit weaknesses, and craft deceptions that mirrored truth. He could sense fear like a predator. He fed on it. By his 7th year at Hogwarts, Tom had cultivated a following, not an army, not yet, but loyal boys and girls who admired him, feared him, followed him. He was offered prestigious positions after graduation, yet turned them down. He wanted something else, something darker. He disappeared from the official records for years, traveling the world, learning forbidden magics, whispering secrets into the ears of witches and wizards who sought power. Always he spoke to the darkest part of them, and always they listened. Years later, when he returned and applied for the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Dumbledore denied him, but even then Tom's manipulation did not falter. He left calmly. And that very night, the position became cursed. No professor ever lasted more than a year. Coincidence, or a final act of vengeance, cast wordlessly? No proof, just the lingering sense that Riddle had once again reshaped the world from the shadows. Tom Riddle understood something most people never do, that fear is more powerful than love and manipulation more lasting than friendship. His every action, from the smallest childhood lie to the orchestration of a girl's death, was a performance of control. And what made him so terrifying was not only the magic he wielded, but the human tools he exploited. People trusted him, they admired him, they believed him, and that made his betrayal all the more destructive. This is what separates monsters from manipulators. A monster is feared because it is seen. A manipulator is feared because it isn't. Tom Riddle learned to vanish behind the faces of others, to let their praise, their blindness, and their fear do the work for him. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he suggested, hinted, stared, and those around him carried out his will as if it were their own. In the end, even his transformation into Lord Voldemort was an act of manipulation. He chose a name that severed ties with his Muggle past, invented an identity that struck fear into the hearts of the magical world, and created a mythology around himself. "I have seen your heart," Dumbledore told him, "and it is mine no longer." But that heart, dark and hollow, had once been a boy who could smile while plotting destruction, who could praise while planting poison, who could inspire love while preparing betrayal. Tom Riddle's story is not just one of magic and murder, it is a case study in control. From Wool's orphanage to the halls of Hogwarts, he wove webs no one could see, only feel. And long after his body was destroyed, his influence remained, etched into the lives he touched, the minds he warped, and the fears he planted. In the world of Harry Potter, few characters are more terrifying, not because of the curses he cast, but because of the emotions he twisted. Manipulation was his wand, fear his spell, and trust his most deadly weapon. Number 23, Early Signs of Parseltongue. In the orphanage on Wool's Orphanage Street, among the squeals of children and the cold rations of cabbage soup, there lived a boy who was nothing like the others. Tom Marvolo Riddle, quiet, observant, unnervingly composed, carried within him a truth he had not chosen, but once discovered he would wield like a weapon. One of the earliest signs that he was not just a wizard, but something rarer still, came in the form of a whisper, not from a human tongue, but from a serpent. He was 6 years old when it happened. In the damp garden behind the orphanage, where weeds grew wild and fences stood rotten, a small grass snake had slithered past a group of playing children. Most ran away, but Tom stood still, watching. The creature paused, turned its head, and hissed. The words came to him not as something strange, but as something clear. "Who are you?" the snake had hissed, and Tom had answered without knowing how. That moment would not be remembered by the others, except perhaps by Billy Stubbs, who claimed he saw the snake rise toward Tom as if listening, like a soldier before a general. Tom did not report the experience. He did not need to. For him, the meaning was already carved in stone. He was different, chosen. Wizards were rare, but this was something older, something ancient. He would later learn the name Parseltongue, the language of serpents, the language of Salazar Slytherin himself. A tongue whispered, through bloodlines drenched in dark power, skipping generations, choosing only the rarest of vessels. Tom's earliest knowledge of Parseltongue did not come from books. It came from instinct, from the strange familiarity of hissing tones and forked syllables that only he could pronounce. When snakes came near, which they did inexplicably, as if summoned, he listened. He asked them where they'd come from, what they had seen, whether they had ever spoken to another like him. No, they always replied. Never. Only you. At the orphanage, Miss Cole, the matron, noted that animals feared the other children, but not Tom. In fact, they seemed to gather near him. Cats curled at his feet before dying suddenly the next morning. Spiders lined his windowsill, unmoving, as though listening. When a pigeon once smashed into the glass of his room and lay twitching, Tom picked it up with serene curiosity and held it as it passed, whispering in a language no other child had heard. Miss Cole once asked Tom what he was doing, and he replied, "Talking." The word rang colder than the room around them. Years later, when Albus Dumbledore came to visit him, he would speak of strange things happening around Tom. Dumbledore mentioned that Tom could make animals do what he wanted, but Tom did not elaborate. He had no desire to offer his truths to someone so clearly unimpressed by power. He had already discovered his place in the world, and it wasn't next to those who feared snakes. It was with those who commanded them. Upon arriving at Hogwarts, Tom was sorted into Slytherin, unsurprisingly. The hat barely touched his head. It sensed the affinity, the bloodline, the echoes of Salazar. Parseltongue was not taught in classrooms, it was never even mentioned. But Tom began to seek, not knowledge for its own sake, but evidence. Evidence that he was more than a student, more than a half-blood orphan. He combed the library, probing into the restricted section for clues about the founders, about secrets, about Slytherin's legacy. He found whispers of a chamber, a hidden sanctum of ancient purpose, said to house a monster that only Slytherin's heir could command. What others treated as myth, Tom treated as prophecy. He remembered the way the snake had spoken to him, the way the world had bent subtly around that shared understanding. He wondered, if a snake could be a companion, what could a monster be? He did not yet know the creature's name. He did not know that it was a basilisk, but he knew that it would be his. It had to be. In his 5th year, Tom found the entrance. It was not in a tower, nor beneath a forbidden floor, but in a bathroom, fitting in a way for a secret that desired humility. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets lay behind a sink, etched with markings no one else had ever questioned. He stared at them, sensing something stir in his blood. "Open," he hissed, not in English, not in any human tongue, but in Parseltongue, pure and raw. The wall shifted, stone groaned, the Chamber of Secrets revealed itself. Inside, the air reeked of ancient dust and something more primal. The basilisk slept, coiled like a god waiting for purpose, and Tom, still barely 16, felt the enormity of what he had done. "Speak to me, Slytherin," he had once said in that same tongue. And now Slytherin had answered. Tom did not unleash the beast immediately. He was patient. He asked it questions, testing its mind, its loyalty. He marveled at how it moved only to his voice, responded only to his commands. It knew he was the heir, without doubt. That was what Parseltongue did, and it wasn't merely speech. It was control, authority. A key passed through the veins of those who shared a founder's blood. He began to weaponize the myth. People whispered of strange sounds in the walls. A girl was found petrified in the library. Then another. No one suspected Tom. He was charming, brilliant, the model student. But even then, Dumbledore watched him closely. Tom could feel it, and he resented it. He had achieved the impossible, proven himself the heir of Slytherin. And yet this old man seemed to disapprove, not of the act, but of why Tom had done it. He closed the chamber temporarily, sacrificing its use to avoid suspicion after the death of a girl, Myrtle Warren. She had seen the creature's eyes. Tom had not intended for her to die, but he did not mourn her. Instead, he blamed the incident on someone else, Hagrid, the half-giant boy with a fondness for dangerous pets. It worked. The school moved on, but the chamber remained. Years passed. Tom left Hogwarts, but never truly. He searched deeper into magic, delving into paths long abandoned, Horcruxes, immortality, names, and all the while the language remained with him. Parseltongue was the one constant, the one truth, the reminder that he was not just any wizard. He was the culmination of a legacy stretching back centuries. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore would later explain to Harry, "Very few wizards speak Parseltongue. Parselmouths are very rare. We believe it is a gift that Salazar Slytherin passed on to his descendants." What Dumbledore did not say, or perhaps chose not to, was that those who speak it often find themselves drawn to darkness, because to speak to snakes is to speak to creatures who know no morality, only instinct. Tom understood that. He embraced it. Even as Lord Voldemort, cloaked in robes and hatred, the voice he used to command Nagini was not learned. It was innate. It flowed from the core of him, a shadow of his childhood, of that day in the orphanage garden when a snake had first spoken to him, and he had spoken back. Parseltongue was not a party trick. It was not something to be admired in dueling clubs or exhibited like a magical curiosity. For Tom Riddle, it was proof that he was born different, born better. It gave him authority in places where power mattered more than morality. It set him apart, not as a leader, but as a ruler, a sovereign among sorcerers. Few at Hogwarts knew about his ability, but those who did never forgot. One Slytherin boy, Antonin Dolohov, once saw Tom whisper to a serpent in the Forbidden Forest during a late-night excursion. The snake bowed its head. Dolohov never asked what was said, but he would later claim, "From that night on, I understood who we were meant to follow." Tom never sought acceptance. He sought submission. Parseltongue gave him that. It was the whisper in the dark that became a roar in battle. When he faced Harry Potter in the graveyard in Goblet of Fire, it was in Parseltongue that he summoned the snake from his wand, not as a symbol, but as a declaration. Even after his temporary destruction, a piece of Tom lived on in Harry. That piece spoke Parseltongue too. The irony that his greatest enemy carried his voice was not lost on Voldemort. He tried to sever the connection, to destroy what he had unwillingly shared. But the language persisted, because Parseltongue was never just about words, it was about identity. When Harry lost the ability after the Horcrux was destroyed, he felt no grief, but the world lost something else. The last echo of a boy in an orphanage who once spoke to a snake and saw a kingdom in its eyes. Parseltongue had marked Tom Riddle for life. It was a scar deeper than any wand could make, a mark of heritage and hunger. It gave him access, but more importantly, it gave him belief that he was destined to rise, that others were meant to fall, that he alone could speak to creatures who slithered in the dark and be understood. As Voldemort rose and fell, as the dark mark burned and faded, Parseltongue remained the thread connecting past to future. It was the serpent on the door, the whisper in the corridor, the hiss in the night, the voice of a child long gone, and yet never truly silent. Number 24, denial of love. There is a wound within Tom Riddle that never healed, not the one he received in battle, nor any scar from duel or spell, but a wound carved into his very soul before he even had a name. Conceived under the influence of a love potion, born in the sterile walls of Wool's orphanage, and abandoned without so much as a letter or lullaby, Tom came into the world as a consequence, not a gift. He never knew what it meant to be wanted. And worse, he never believed such a thing as genuine affection truly existed. From the start, Tom was different, but not just because he could make things happen without touching them. He carried within him a hollowness, an absence of something every other child seemed to have, a lightness in the eyes, a willingness to trust. While the other orphans clung together for comfort, Tom stood apart, proud and suspicious. Mrs. Cole, the matron of the orphanage, once described him as a funny boy. Not quite right. But it wasn't mischief or moodiness that defined him, it was detachment. He neither sought kindness nor returned it. He learned to mimic politeness when needed, to manipulate concern when useful, but at his core, he remained untouched by the concept of love. By the time Dumbledore came to visit him in the orphanage, Tom had already built walls around himself so high that not even truth could scale them. He did not ask why he was different. He already believed himself superior. He didn't wonder why his parents had left. He'd convinced himself they were dead or unworthy. Love, for Tom, was not something he'd lost. It was something he never acknowledged as real in the first place. Years later, as Lord Voldemort, that same child, now cloaked in terror and shrouded in fear, still could not fathom what he had missed. "There is nothing worse than death, Dumbledore," he declared in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, betraying everything he understood, or rather, failed to understand. For Dumbledore, love was stronger than fear, deeper than ambition. But for Voldemort, it was merely another lie adults told children to keep them weak. And so he denied it, he laughed at it, he destroyed it wherever it grew. But the magic of love in J.K. Rowling's universe is not poetic metaphor. It is binding, tangible power. And this is what Tom never comprehended when Lily Potter gave her life for her son. She invoked a protection Voldemort could not penetrate. He didn't realize that love as powerful as your mother's for you leaves its own mark, Dumbledore told Harry. To have been loved so deeply will give us some protection forever. This mark was not visible, but it was stronger than any curse. Voldemort, for all his brilliance, could not grasp this, because to understand love one must have felt it. And he never had. At Hogwarts, where so many students found friendship and belonging, Tom wore his solitude like armor. He charmed professors, impressed classmates, but he never allowed anyone close. He was admired, even feared, but never truly known. Not by Slughorn, who prized his brilliance, nor by the followers who would later call themselves Death Eaters. He did not form friendships, he recruited instruments. Even those closest to him, like Avery and Mulciber, were merely pawns in his vision. He trusted no one, not even himself. When Dumbledore once asked Harry what set him apart from Voldemort, Harry answered simply, "I have something you don't." That something was love. Love from Ron and Hermione, from the Weasleys, from Sirius and Remus, even from Snape in his own tragic, complex way. Harry had known loss, yes, but he had also known warmth, comfort, sacrifice. Voldemort had known only power. And in the end, power was not enough. The irony of Tom Riddle's life is that he sought immortality to escape death, but it was his inability to feel love that made him truly empty, a ghost long before he split his soul. He feared death because he could not imagine being remembered for love. He wanted to live forever, not to be cherished, but to be feared. And so he fractured himself again and again, creating Horcruxes, each one a testament to his denial of human connection. Each act, from the murder of Myrtle to the desecration of the Gaunt ring, was not just a crime against another, but a violence against his own soul. When he killed his own father, Tom did so not in a fit of rage or sorrow, but as a cold demonstration of control. His father had abandoned his mother, yes, but Tom felt no grief, only scorn. The idea of avenging love never entered his mind. It was not a son reclaiming honor, but a wizard claiming superiority. The very murder that should have shaken him instead empowered him. "I killed my father," he once admitted to Dumbledore through memories. "Not he hurt me, not he left me, but I killed him, with the pride of one who had proven his dominance." Even his obsession with pure blood supremacy is a cruel joke. For Tom himself was half-blood. He hated the Muggle part of himself, not just out of shame, but because it reminded him of a truth he could not bear, that love, however twisted, had once tried to reach him through his mother. Merope Gaunt, abused, terrified, desperate, had tried to make someone love her. In using a love potion, she violated his father's will, yes. But in her broken way, she still yearned for connection. When she let her husband go, hoping he might love her back, she died in despair. Tom never forgave her for that weakness, and so he grew colder, smarter, more cunning, more cruel, and yet always lonelier. The most heartbreaking proof of his denial comes not in his crimes, but in his confusion. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Voldemort returns in a new body, he stands before Harry and mocks Lily's sacrifice. "Your mother died to save you. Yes, that's a powerful counter-charm. She gave you decent protection, but she expired in the end, just like your father." He does not understand the act. He cannot comprehend dying not out of fear, but out of love. To him, that is foolishness, a weakness, and yet it is precisely that act that makes Harry untouchable. Even in the final battle at Hogwarts, Tom still believes he can win through fear. He promises safety to those who surrender, offers mercy to Harry if he will just step aside. But these offers are empty because Voldemort cannot give what he does not possess. He has never known love, so he cannot inspire loyalty. He rules through terror, but terror crumbles when hearts are brave. And in that moment, Standing among friends, family, and allies, Harry is stronger than the darkest magic in the world. When Harry walks into the Forbidden Forest to sacrifice himself, he mirrors Lily's act, and in doing so, he renews the same ancient protection. Voldemort believes he has won, again failing to see the truth beneath the act. Harry Potter is dead, he declares, but love, once more, says otherwise. And it is love that brings Harry back, love that shields his friends, love that cracks open the lie Voldemort built his life upon. The tragedy of Tom Riddle is not simply that he became a monster, it is that he was given chances and still chose to deny the only thing that might have saved him. Dumbledore offered guidance, Slughorn offered mentorship, even Harry, in the end, offered understanding. "Try for some remorse, Riddle," Harry pleaded in Deathly Hallows, but Tom only sneered. Even at the very end, as death approached in the Great Hall, he clung to arrogance, to hatred. He died as he lived, unloved and alone. What is perhaps most haunting is that Voldemort did not have to be this way. He was not cursed from birth, though his beginning was cruel. He had magic, yes, but he also had choice. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Tom had the choice to see love, to trust it, to let it in, but he feared it. He saw in it the threat of vulnerability. And so he denied it, rejected it, destroyed it, until there was nothing left inside him but shadows. The contrast with Harry could not be starker. Both were orphans, both were marked by fate. Both faced terrible loss. But where Harry opened his heart, Tom closed his. Where Harry leaned on others, Tom trusted no one. And in the end, it was not prophecy or power that determined their fate, but love. A force neither wand nor spell could conjure, but which proved the strongest magic of all. Lord Voldemort was brilliant, ambitious, terrifying, but he was also broken, not by a curse, but by a choice, the choice to see love as weakness. And that choice, more than any, sealed his doom. He split his soul to live forever. And yet he never truly lived at all. Number 25, The Memory in Hogwarts. There are few things in Hogwarts' long and shadowy history as unsettling as the legacy of Tom Marvolo Riddle. Among the ghosts in its halls, the portraits that murmur and shift in their sleep, and the shifting staircases that know too much, it is not a physical remnant, but a thought, a preserved memory that stands as the most chilling. The diary, black-bound and deceptively simple, once belonged to a charming, intelligent, and exceptionally gifted student. Yet that diary was not simply a notebook, it was a Horcrux. And within its pages slept something far darker than ink. The diary was not discovered in a dungeon or a secret room. It was slipped innocently into the hand of a lonely girl, Ginny Weasley, who could not have known the weight of what she carried. But this was Riddle's design. Even in fragmented form, his manipulation was subtle, insidious. He listened to her fears, her insecurities, her thoughts, as though he truly cared. The more she wrote, the more he responded, and the deeper she fell under the illusion that someone, anyone, understood her. This is where Riddle's cruelty was most refined, in his ability to offer comfort, only to twist it into submission. This version of Tom Riddle was not a ghost. He was not dead in the way ghosts are dead. The boy who appeared through the diary was whole in every visible way, polite, curious, articulate. As Harry Potter himself would discover, there was something almost noble in his bearing. Tom did not loom with menace at first glance. He stood tall, composed, dressed in the Hogwarts uniform of the 1940s. His manners were impeccable, his tone respectful. But it was all a mask, and slowly, inevitably, it began to slip. When Harry encountered him, drawn into the diary's memory like a dream wrapped in fog, he found himself inside a different Hogwarts, one coloured by shadows and stillness. The great hall did not roar with laughter. The common rooms felt silent and watching. And at the centre of this memory stood Tom. There was nothing monstrous about him. His face was handsome, pale, eyes dark like still water. But behind those eyes was calculation, and behind every smile was purpose. It was in the Chamber of Secrets that the truth revealed itself, brick by damp brick. Riddle had framed Hagrid all those years ago for the attacks on students, not out of hatred for Hagrid, though he likely did despise the half-giant, but because it suited his narrative. "Hagrid's monster is loose again," he had claimed, knowing full well it was his own basilisk slithering through the pipes of the castle. The truth, as it often is with Riddle, was never as important as the illusion. What mattered was control. When Harry demanded answers in the echoing chamber, surrounded by the bones of victims long turned to dust, Tom obliged, not with violence at first, but with story. He revealed his name. "Tom Marvolo Riddle," he wrote in the air with Ginny's stolen wand. Then the letters twisted, reshaped, becoming the infamous anagram, "I am Lord Voldemort." This was not a coincidence. This was legacy by design. He had rejected his father's name, just as he had rejected every trace of his humanity. The boy in the diary was a window into who Riddle had once been, but not into a lost innocence. There was no tragic fall from grace. He had already begun his descent, long before the Horcrux was made. This is perhaps the most terrifying truth, that the evil in Tom was not born of corruption, but of deliberate choice. From his days in the orphanage, he knew how to hurt and how to hide. He collected trophies from his victims. He frightened the other children with whispers and lies. Dumbledore, visiting the orphanage, noted the sense of control, of coldness, in the boy's gaze. Even at 11, Riddle was already a predator in a school uniform. In the diary, this early version of Voldemort reveals his nature, not with shouting or rage, but through the quiet erosion of innocence. Ginny was possessed not by brute force, but by affection, by the false belief that someone finally saw her. She confided in him about her brothers, about school, about her fears of not fitting in. And with every confession, Riddle grew stronger. "Little Ginny's been writing in me for months," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I've grown very fond of her." But fondness for Riddle was always a tool, never a feeling. Harry saw in this phantom not just a younger version of his enemy, but a warped reflection of himself. Both orphans, both half-bloods, both raised away from the magical world. But where Harry had friends, Tom sought followers. Where Harry sought to protect, Tom sought to conquer. "There are strange likenesses between us, after all," Riddle admitted. But what mattered most was not similarity, it was choice. The diary Horcrux operated as a parasite. It fed on Ginny's spirit, on her energy until she was barely conscious, a shell of herself. She painted messages in blood. She released the basilisk. She nearly died, not by accident, but because Riddle wanted her death to seal his return. He would have drained her life completely, not for power alone, but as proof of his triumph. This boy, this memory, already knew the power of death and the thrill of domination. Even Dumbledore once remarked on the nature of Horcruxes, noting their indifference to life. But the diary did more than extend Riddle's mortality. It amplified his identity. It allowed a fragment of him to live, speak, manipulate, and kill long after the original soul had aged into something more monstrous. It was proof that the darkness in Voldemort was not merely a result of his transformation into a snake-faced tyrant. The rot had started early in the mind of a clever, ambitious boy who believed he was better than everyone else. What makes the diary so horrifying is that it preserves not a moment in time, but an attitude, a world-view. Riddle saw Hogwarts as his kingdom. He explored the castle's secrets with obsessive precision. He found the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, learned Parseltongue, and became heir to Salazar Slytherin, not by blood, but by ideology. He shared Slytherin's disdain for Muggleborns and took it further, transforming prejudice into policy, ambition into genocide. The diary is not a passive artifact. When Harry destroyed it with the fang of the basilisk, the ink screamed. Black liquid hissed from the pages like blood. Riddle's memory writhed, clutched at life, dissolved into smoke. It was a death, not of Voldemort himself, but of one of his many masks. Yet the horror lingered. That such a thing could be made at all, that memory could be weaponized, that a schoolbook could whisper lies and possess a child, was a reminder that magic was never inherently good. The use of the diary by Lucius Malfoy was no coincidence. Voldemort had entrusted the Horcrux to him, not just for safekeeping, but as a test. Lucius, arrogant and cunning, planted the diary into Hogwarts through Ginny's cauldron. He believed himself clever, but he had no idea what the diary really was. Even among Death Eaters, Voldemort did not share his full secrets. The result was nearly catastrophic. It took the death of a basilisk and the near death of a girl to stop the diary's ascent. Years later, as Dumbledore walked Harry through the pensive memories of Riddle's life, the diary memory gained even more weight. We saw Tom charming Slughorn, cornering him for knowledge of Horcruxes. We saw him collecting artifacts, tokens of power, but the diary was the first, the original. A Horcrux made with murder, the murder of Myrtle Warren in the girl's bathroom. Her death, senseless and cruel, was transformed into eternal life for a fragment of Tom's soul. And that fragment, wrapped in charm and courtesy, smiled from the diary's pages with cold precision. It is this duality, politeness wrapped around poison, that makes the diary version of Tom Riddle so unforgettable. Harry was not battling a shadow. He was fighting a boy who still believed in his supremacy. "You're not special," Riddle told him, venom softening his words. "You're just lucky." The hatred was disguised, the malice carefully controlled, but it was always there. And that made him more terrifying than any snarling beast. The image of that memory stayed with Harry long after the chamber was sealed. It wasn't just that he had seen Voldemort as a child, it was that he had seen the truth, that evil does not arrive with fanfare or fire. It begins with a boy who thinks he's owed more, a boy who learns to lie better than anyone, a boy who keeps a diary, not to remember, but to remake. The diary serves as a warning not just to Hogwarts, but to everyone who ever underestimated Tom Riddle. Evil, in its earliest form, can be charming. It can listen, it can wait. And then, when the moment is right, it writes itself into your life, page by page. Number 26, Obsession with Slytherin's Legacy. There is a single fact that, once discovered, changed the course of Tom Riddle's life forever. He was a descendant of Salazar Slytherin. That revelation, delivered to him not long after his arrival at Hogwarts, did not just satisfy a curiosity, it ignited a fire. It was not enough for Tom to be the most talented student of his generation. He needed something more, a legacy, a destiny, something that proved he was more than just another clever wizard. Slytherin's blood in his veins became, in his mind, the divine proof that he was meant to rule, to rise, to conquer. He delved into every known fragment of Salazar Slytherin's life, scanning ancient texts and forgotten scrolls in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library. His mind absorbed legends and scraps of knowledge like a sponge, assembling a picture of a man who shared Tom's own disgust for weakness, for sentiment, for the mingling of magic and muggle blood. Slytherin, as Tom interpreted him, was a visionary misunderstood by his peers. Riddle, too, fancied himself a misunderstood genius, far above the rest. To carry Slytherin's blood meant, to Tom, that his own views on magical superiority were validated by history itself. It wasn't just history that fascinated him. It was the physical inheritance. The Chamber of Secrets, buried beneath the school and long thought to be a myth, became Tom's obsession. For centuries, it was said to be a legend whispered among students, a tale too far-fetched to believe. But Tom believed. He believed with the fanaticism of someone who needed it to be true. In his 5th year, he found it, not by luck, but through careful research, interviews with ghosts, and tracking down every stone that looked out of place in the castle. When he opened it, speaking in Parseltongue, in the ancient language of snakes that only Slytherin's true heir could speak, he was no longer just Tom Riddle. He became the heir. Inside the chamber, he found what he considered Slytherin's most magnificent gift, the basilisk. A serpent of immense size coiled in the darkness for centuries, its eyes lethal, its skin impenetrable, and its loyalty unquestionable to the one who could speak its language. To most, it would be a monster. To Tom, it was a king's weapon, a guardian of purity, and a symbol of his rightful place above others. When he stood before it, commanding it with his voice alone, he felt the weight of centuries shift onto his shoulders, a crown of lineage and terror. What began as reverence became emulation. Tom didn't just want to honor Salazar Slytherin, he wanted to surpass him. He began calling himself Lord Voldemort, an identity crafted not just to shed his Muggle father's name, but to forge a new legend rooted in Slytherin's ideals. "I have seen the future, and I know it belongs to me," he once wrote in a stolen diary. That diary, charmed with fragments of his soul, was itself a dark tribute to Slytherin's cunning, a diary meant to manipulate, influence, and possess. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore later reflected on this obsession, telling Harry, "Very few people know that Lord Voldemort was once called Tom Riddle. Those who do use the name are often afraid to speak it." Even the headmaster, with all his wisdom, had underestimated how deeply Riddle had woven himself into the past. To Tom, the name Slytherin was more than ancestry. It was prophecy. Slytherin's own departure from Hogwarts had been fueled by ideological conflict. He had wanted to admit only pure-blood students into the school, fearing that Muggle-borns could threaten the magical community from within. Centuries later, Tom Riddle reinterpreted this, not as fear but as clarity, not as prejudice but as protection. He did not merely hate Muggle-borns, he considered their very existence a contamination. The murders he committed, the basilisk he unleashed, they were, in his twisted mind, acts of cleansing. His first known victim was a girl named Myrtle Warren, the girl who would become the ghost known as Moaning Myrtle. Her death was a cold, calculated act. He released the basilisk upon her not out of rage, but as a test of the chamber's power, of his own ability to command it. The girl had no defense. One look into the creature's eyes, and her life ended in an instant. And yet no remorse flickered in Riddle's heart. In his mind, she was a necessary casualty in the fulfillment of something far greater. Afterward, he used the tragedy to his advantage, framing Rubeus Hagrid and his pet Acromantula, Aragog, as the culprits. His manipulation was flawless, and he was awarded for his bravery with a medal for magical merit. But the medal meant nothing. What mattered was that the chamber remained secret and the legacy of Slytherin intact. Even then his vision stretched far beyond Hogwarts. This was merely the beginning, a rehearsal for a darker opera he would conduct across the wizarding world. Years later, when the diary was given to Ginny Weasley, the same magic reawakened. "I preserved my 16-year-old self, to enchant Ginny Weasley, to possess her, to make her reopen the Chamber of Secrets," the memory of Riddle revealed to Harry. The diary, a Horcrux, contained not just his soul, but the full manifestation of his ideology. Through Ginny, he once again released the basilisk. Through her, he extended his influence, and through her near death, he almost returned to life, a resurrection born from a legacy of hate. His fascination with Slytherin was never passive. It was active, personal, sacred. He chose a wand core of phoenix feather, the twin to Harry's, but his wandwood was yew, traditionally associated with death. In contrast, Salazar Slytherin had wielded a wand made of snakewood, known to enhance dark spells and respond strongly to Parseltongue. Tom Riddle sought out anything that could bring him closer to Slytherin, even if it meant embracing death itself. The locket of Salazar Slytherin, one of the original heirlooms, became another object of obsession. Once belonging to his mother's family, the Gaunts, it had been stolen and sold, eventually coming into the possession of Hepzibah Smith. Tom murdered her for it, not simply to possess it, but to corrupt it. He turned the locket into a Horcrux, embedding within it the echo of his soul and anchoring his immortality to the name of Slytherin. In doing so, he ensured that his legacy, and Salazar's, would never be forgotten. The Gaunt family themselves were a portrait of what Riddle despised and admired. They were pure blood, but degraded by centuries of inbreeding and madness. He met his uncle Morfin Gaunt, a disturbed and violent man who carried the ring of Marvolo, another Slytherin heirloom. Riddle killed him, erased his memories, and took the ring. It, too, became a Horcrux. By claiming these artifacts, he believed he was restoring honor to the Slytherin line, filtering out the madness and replacing it with order and vision. To those who truly knew the history, it was clear that Tom did not simply idolize Salazar Slytherin, he believed himself to be his reincarnation. The basilisk, the chamber, the locket, the ring, each was a step in constructing a throne from which he would rule. And when he recruited Death Eaters, many were Slytherins. He called them his inner circle, his elite. Even the name Death Eaters had the aura of ancient rituals and hidden cults, echoes of a darker Slytherin past. But unlike Slytherin, Tom Riddle went further. He split his soul into 7 fragments, believing in the magical perfection of that number. Slytherin, for all his beliefs, had never dared such sacrilege, but Tom saw himself not just as a student, not even as an heir, but as a god. He would not only carry Slytherin's torch, he would surpass him and ascend. The past was his to claim, the future his to design. Every stone of Hogwarts, every echo in its halls, reminded Tom of the legacy he had uncovered. When he returned years later to apply for the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor, it wasn't out of a desire to teach. It was because Hogwarts was his birthright. Dumbledore saw through it. "You're not seeking a job," he said. "You're seeking a place of power." And so Riddle denied that position, cursed it. No teacher would ever last more than a year afterward. Even the snake Nagini, his most visible companion in later years, was a living echo of the basilisk. Though not the same, Nagini symbolized the enduring bond between Voldemort and serpents. She became his final Horcrux, a last act of devotion to the creature he had once commanded beneath the castle. And like the basilisk, she would die protecting the ideology of her master, and the twisted legacy of a founder who had been dead for 1,000 years. The tragedy lies not just in the lives Tom Riddle took, but in the way he defiled something ancient. Salazar Slytherin, for all his flaws, was a man of conviction. Tom turned that conviction into fanaticism, then into violence. He didn't just inherit a name, he weaponized it. He built an empire not just on fear, but on a myth carefully curated and reshaped to suit his desires. In the end, that myth destroyed him. For when he stood in the ruins of Hogwarts facing Harry Potter in the final battle, he was not a god, but a man consumed by his own illusions. The basilisk lay dead, the locket destroyed, the ring shattered. Every piece of Slytherin he had tried to preserve had been turned against him, and the very magic he believed made him immortal. The Horcruxes became the instruments of his end. But perhaps the most tragic irony of all was that Tom Riddle never understood Salazar Slytherin. He saw in him only the hate, only the pride. But Slytherin had also valued loyalty, resilience, and cunning used with purpose. Tom mistook dominance for vision. In trying to fulfill a legacy, he warped it beyond recognition, and so he died, not as the heir of Slytherin, but as its final shame. Number 27, Contempt for Weakness. There are few characters in the magical world whose inner darkness shines with such precision and cruelty as that of Tom Marvolo Riddle. His path, from orphaned boy to the terror of the wizarding world, was paved not only with ambition, but with a deep-rooted disgust, an all-consuming loathing for weakness in any form. This contempt was not a passing attitude or a symptom of power, it was the core of his identity. Tom did not simply dislike weakness, he hunted it, destroyed it, and ensured it never found shelter within his soul. The seeds of this revulsion were planted early. The orphanage where Tom was raised, cold and grey and full of trembling voices, became the backdrop of his first judgments. The other children, many of whom cried easily, needed help tying shoes or feared the dark. only fueled his contempt. In his eyes, they were fragile creatures, things to manipulate or avoid. He once made a boy named Billy Stubbs sob uncontrollably by hanging his pet rabbit from the rafters, a calculated move to assert dominance, to test the reactions of weakness. Dumbledore, visiting the orphanage in Half-Blood Prince, noted the sense of power and cruelty that already gleamed behind the boy's eyes. Riddle's hatred of frailty began not with rage, but with cold observation. He saw weakness as a disease, and believed himself immune. The memory of his mother shaped that belief. Gaunt, a witch from an ancient bloodline, died shortly after giving birth to Tom. But more damning in his view was the reason why. She had been left by his father, Tom Riddle Sr., a muggle whom she had enchanted with a love potion. When the effects wore off, he abandoned her without remorse. To Tom, his mother had died not of illness or sacrifice, but of powerlessness. She had magic in her veins and still failed to keep a man, failed to defend her child's future. "She had a wand, didn't she?" he would say later in the orphanage. "She could have done magic. She could have made him stay." Her death was not tragic to him. It was pitiful. This early belief hardened as he entered Hogwarts. In the House of Slytherin, Tom found validation. He became a prefect, a model student, a boy with an uncanny charm and a terrifying intellect. But behind the polished exterior lay an obsession. He studied the concept of immortality with religious fervor. Death, he believed, was the ultimate weakness, and those who accepted it were fools. He found in the restricted section mention of Horcruxes, and the idea infected his mind like a fire. To split one's soul, to tether it to the world so that death could never claim you, this was not just magic. It was a declaration. I will never be as weak as my mother. The process of making Horcruxes, horrific as it was, required murder. But Tom had no moral barriers. He considered morality another form of frailty, a chain the strong must shatter. His first known kill, that of his father and grandparents, was a precise severing of his past. The Riddles had always been muggles. By extinguishing them, Tom was not only erasing witnesses, but removing the source of what he perceived to be a blemish, his connection to powerlessness, to ordinariness. As Dumbledore said, he shed his name, which was the last tie that bound him to people who were not only unmagical, but, to use his own word, weak. As Lord Voldemort, he rebuilt his identity from nothing. Even his name was reforged. I am Lord Voldemort, an anagram that removed the shame of Tom Riddle. This new persona did not tolerate the limits of the human condition. He demanded control over every inch of his existence. He never allowed others to see him injured or vulnerable. He spoke rarely of the past and never of pain. Even love, that most human of bonds, was to him a kind of trap, a softness that made one bleed too easily. He could not love and did not understand why others valued it. To him, love was the language of the weak. He surrounded himself with Death-Eaters, wizards and witches who mistook fear for loyalty, but even among them there was no place for gentleness. Those who faltered were punished cruelly. When Avery begged for mercy after the First Wizarding War, Voldemort's response was brutal. "Crucio!" he spat, torturing him not just to punish disloyalty, but to remind everyone watching, mercy has no place here. Weakness must be burned out like rot. Even among his closest followers, Voldemort maintained a distance. Bellatrix Lestrange, the most fanatically devoted of them all, loved him in a twisted, obsessive way. But he never returned her feelings. In the Half-Blood Prince, it's clear that he regarded emotions as liabilities. To give love was to yield. To feel affection was to expose the heart, and Tom had long since locked his own behind layers of dark enchantments. When he created his final Horcrux, embedding a piece of his soul into Nagini, he crossed a final line. The serpent, deadly and soulless, became his companion, not a friend, but a creature he could trust only because it was not human. Even pets, in his mind, were dangerous if they were capable of sentiment. He found in Nagini something like a mirror, a being that killed without question, followed without love, existed without hesitation. He whispered to her in Parseltongue, not as a friend, but as a master to a weapon. During the Second Wizarding War, his contempt for human frailty became even more pronounced. He murdered Charity Burbage for teaching Muggle studies, not because the subject threatened him, but because her compassion did. She had called for tolerance and understanding, two qualities Voldemort considered not only useless, but treacherous. He killed her in front of his followers, her body spinning above the table as Nagini devoured her. It was a sermon in flesh. This is what happens to those who feel. One of the greatest ironies in Tom Riddle's life is that his war against weakness made him more vulnerable than he could ever imagine. His fear of death led him to splinter his soul, deforming it to the point of near madness. Dumbledore once observed that Voldemort had mutilated his own soul beyond recognition, and that was no metaphor. He had destroyed the very parts of himself that made understanding, empathy, or growth possible. In his pursuit of godhood, he lost all traces of humanity. This internal void was most visible in his final moments. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort confronted Harry Potter for the last time. Harry, who had been willing to die for others, had returned from death itself not with vengeance, but with resolve. In contrast, Voldemort, despite possessing the Elder Wand and a legion of followers, was unraveling. His voice cracked, his spells misfired. The wand, which recognized Harry as its true master, betrayed him. In that instant, Voldemort faced the thing he had run from all his life, not death, but powerlessness. When the killing curse rebounded, Voldemort died without ceremony. There was no final scream, no blaze of dark magic. His body simply fell to the floor. Tom Riddle hit the floor with a mundane finality, the book says. He died not as a dark god, but as a man who had spent his life denying what he could never escape, the fragility of the soul. There's a tragic lesson in his story. In trying to rid himself of all weakness, he rid himself of all that made life worth living. He felt no sorrow, no joy, no connection. Even his victories were hollow. When he broke into Dumbledore's tomb to steal the Elder Wand, it was not triumph, it was desecration. And when he cast the final spells of the war, he did so alone, surrounded by followers, but never by friends. Tom Riddle never understood that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to live despite it. Harry, whom he mocked as soft, survived not because of invulnerability, but because of love, sacrifice, and resilience. When Voldemort called him a foolish boy for lowering his wand, he misunderstood entirely. For Tom, letting down one's guard was suicide. For Harry, it was proof of trust and purpose. Tom Riddle was a boy who hated tears, who despised trembling voices and unsteady hands. He became a man who feared death, silenced mercy, and hunted humanity from his own soul. But in the end, the very emotions he disdained became the shield that protected others, and the absence of those emotions became the sword that shattered his own legacy. His story is not merely that of a villain, but of a warning. It is a tale of what happens when strength is mistaken for dominance and weakness for failure. It's the portrait of a man who tried to ascend beyond pain and instead fell beneath it. The name he crafted for himself, Voldemort, meant flight from death. But in fleeing from death, he abandoned life. And in that final moment, when the curse he cast sealed his fate, Tom Riddle, once the brightest student of his generation, learned the truth. Not all weakness is shameful, not all pain is defeat, and to feel nothing at all is not power. Number 28. Hunger for control. From the moment Tom Marvolo Riddle opened his eyes to the world, he did not merely observe, he studied, analyzed, and planned. The orphanage where he spent his earliest years was not a place of warmth or kindness. It was cold, impersonal, and routine-driven. But rather than becoming just another silent child, Tom observed the staff, the patterns of discipline, the weak points in routines, and the psychological weaknesses of the other children. He discovered early that he had the ability to influence and frighten others, and he found it intoxicating. Tom's hunger for control began long before he understood the true nature of his magic. Even as a young boy, before he had ever held a wand, he manipulated others with nothing but his presence and the eerie calm in his voice. He could make things happen. Make a child scream without being touched, make a pet disappear without being seen, make adults grow pale without raising his voice. The matron, Mrs. Cole, once remarked to Albus Dumbledore, "There have been incidents, nasty things, but for Tom, these were not accidents. They were calculated experiments in control, his early way of shaping the world around him." When Dumbledore visited the orphanage to offer Tom a place at Hogwarts, Tom's reaction revealed his nature. He was not impressed by the chance to learn, or he was excited to have his power acknowledged. "I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me," he told Dumbledore, not with fear or guilt, but with pride. The word control was not used, but it vibrated beneath every syllable. Magic, for Tom, was never a gift. It was a weapon, a tool to impose his will. At Hogwarts, Tom Riddle flourished not only because he was brilliant, but because he immediately began weaving his quiet empire. The teachers saw a charming, gifted boy, but his peers, particularly the weaker-willed, felt the pull of his gravity. Tom did not create friendships, he created subordinates. Carefully and quietly, he selected those who admired strength and despised rules, and he groomed them into a following. He told them what they wanted to hear, manipulated their insecurities, and planted in them the seeds of fear and admiration. It wasn't about companionship, it was about establishing dominance. It was about creating a hierarchy with him at the apex. One of the earliest examples of this was his control over a boy named Avery. While others avoided Avery for his odd behavior, Tom saw opportunity. He offered protection in exchange for loyalty. Over time, others like Lestrange, Mulciber, and Rosier joined the unspoken circle. By his 5th year, Tom had cultivated a group that hung on his every word. They didn't yet call him Lord Voldemort, but they obeyed him like one. He rewarded loyalty with inclusion and punished dissent with subtle exclusion or quiet threats. He never needed to raise his voice. Control extended beyond people. Tom was obsessed with mastering the very fabric of Hogwarts itself. He probed its secrets with tireless precision. The diary he later transformed into a Horcrux began as a detailed log of magical phenomena and experiments. He traced the legend of Salazar Slytherin with an almost religious fervor, not for historical curiosity, but because Slytherin was a symbol of purity and power, ideals Tom wanted to claim and reshape. When he opened the Chamber of Secrets, it was not merely to rid the school of Muggle-borns. It was to assert his ultimate dominance over the institution itself. This wasn't rebellion, it was conquest. Tom Riddle did not care for the laws of the magical world because they were created by others. He only respected systems he could control. The ministry, the school governors, even the magical traditions of wand law, he viewed all of them as limitations imposed by lesser minds. His interest in magical artifacts like the diadem of Ravenclaw or the locket of Slytherin wasn't about heritage. It was about ownership, about taking symbols of others' greatness and twisting them into instruments of his own power. He wanted the world to forget their original meaning and remember only that they belonged to Voldemort,